thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I've been following for ages and I'm excited to be here.
I'm even more excited. I really appreciate that. I want to start with your time at OpenAI. So you joined OpenAI about a year ago. Before that, you had your own startup for about 5 years. Before that, you were a product manager at Dropbox. I imagine OpenAI is very different from every other place you've worked. Let me just ask you this. What is most different about how OpenAI operates? And what's something that you've learned there that you think you're going to take with you wherever you go, assuming you ever leave?
By far, I would say the speed and ambition of working at OpenAI are just like dramatically more than what I can imagine. And, I guess it's kind of an embarrassing thing to say because, everyone who's a startup founder thinks like, oh yeah, my startup moves super fast and the talent bar is super high and we're super ambitious. But I have to say, like, working at OpenAI just kind of like made me reimagine what that even means.
We hear this a lot about, feels like every AI company is just like, oh my God, I can't believe how fast they're moving. Is there an example of just like, wow, that wouldn't have happened this quickly anywhere else?
The most obvious thing that comes to mind is just like the explosive growth of Codex itself. I think it's a while since we bumped our external number, but it's like the 10xing of Codex's scale was just like super fast in a matter of months. And it's like well more since then. And, like once you've lived through that, or at least speaking for myself, like having lived through that now, I feel like anytime I'm going to spend my time on like, building tech product, there's that kind of that speed and scale that I now need to meet. If I think of like what I was doing in my startup, it moved like way slower. And there's always this balance with startups of like, how much do you commit to an idea that you have versus like find out that it's not working and then pivot. But I think one thing I've realized at OpenAI is like the amount of impact that we can have and in fact need to have to do a good job is so high that I have to be like way more ruthless with how I spend my time now.
Before we get to Codex, is there a way that they've structured the org or I don't know, the way that OpenAI operates that allows the team to move this quickly? Because everyone wants to move super fast. I imagine there's a structural approach to allowing this to happen.
I mean, so one thing is just the technology that we're building with has like just transformed so many things, from like both how we build, but also like what kinds of things we can enable for users. And, we spend most of our time talking about like the sort of improvements in the foundation models. But I believe that even if we had no more progress today with models, which is absolutely not the case, but even if we had no more progress, we are way behind on product. There's so much more product to build. So I think like, just like the moment is ripe, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot of sort of counterintuitive things that surprised me when I arrived as far as like how things are structured. One example that comes to mind is like when I was working on my startup and before that when I was at Dropbox, it was like very important, especially as a PM to like always kind of rally the ship. And it was kind of like, make sure you're pointed in the right direction and then you can like accelerate in that direction. But here, I think because we don't exactly know like what capabilities will even come up soon and we don't know what's going to work technically, and then we also don't know what's going to land even if it works technically, it's much more important for us to be very like humble and learn a lot more empirically and just try things quickly. And like the org is set up in that way to be incredibly bottoms up. This is again one of those things that like, as you were saying, everyone wants to move fast. I think everyone likes to say that they're bottoms up, or at least a lot of people do. But OpenAI is like truly, truly bottoms up. And that's like been a learning experience for me that now like it'll be interesting if I ever work at like, I don't think it'll even make sense to work at a non-AI company in the future. I don't even know what that means. But if I were to imagine it or go back in time, I think I would like run things totally different.
What I'm hearing is kind of this ready, fire, aim is the approach more than ready, aim, fire. And there's something, and as you process that, because that may not come across well, but I actually have heard this a lot at AI companies is because you don't know, and Nick Turley shared, I think, the same sentiment, because you don't know how people will use it, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time making it perfect. It's better to just get it out there in a primordial way, see how people use it, and then go big on that use case.
Yeah. It's like, to use this analogy a little bit, I feel like there is an aim component, but the aim component is much fuzzier. It's kind of like roughly, what do we think can happen? Like someone I've learned a ton from working here is a research lead, and he likes to say that like at OpenAI, we can have really good conversations about something that's like a year plus from now. And, there's a lot of ambiguity in what will happen, but like that's a right sort of timeline. And then we can have really good conversations about what's happening like in like low months or weeks. But there's kind of this like awkward middle ground, which was like, as you start approaching a year, but you're not at a year, where it's like very difficult to reason about, right? And so as far as like aiming, I think we want to know like, okay, what are some of the futures that we're trying to build towards? And like a lot of the problems we're dealing with in AI, like such as alignment, are problems you need to be thinking out like really far out into the future. So we're kind of aiming fuzzily there. But when it comes down to the more tactically, like, oh yeah, like what product will we build? And therefore, how will people use that product? That's the place where we're much more like, let's find out empirically.
That's a good way of putting it. Something else that when people hear this, people sometimes hear companies like yours saying, okay, we're going to be bottoms up. We're going to try a bunch of stuff. We're not going to have exactly a plan of where it's going in the next few months. The key is you all hire the best people in the world. And so that feels like a really key ingredient in order to be this successful at bottoms up work.
It just super resonates,
Yeah.
basically.
Cool.
I was just like, again, surprised or even shocked when I arrived at like the level of like individual like drive and like autonomy that everyone here has. So I think like the way that OpenAI runs, like you can't like read this or listen to a podcast and be like, I'm just going to deploy this to my company. Maybe this is a harsh thing to say, but I think like, yeah, very few companies have the talent caliber to be able to do that. So it might need to be like adjusted if you were going to implement this.
Okay, so let's talk Codex. You lead work on Codex. How's Codex going? What numbers can you share? Is there anything you can share there? Also, just not everyone knows exactly what Codex is. Explain what Codex is.
Totally, yeah. So I had the very lucky job of living in the future and leading product on Codex. And Codex is OpenAI's coding agent. So super concretely, that means it's an IDE extension, like a VS Code extension that you can install, or a terminal tool that you can install. And when you do so, you can then basically pair with Codex to answer questions about code, write code, run tests, execute code, and do a bunch of the work in sort of that like thick middle section of the software development lifecycle, which is all about, writing code that you're going to get into production. More broadly, we think of Codex as like, what it currently is just the beginning of a software engineering teammate. And so, when we use a big word like teammate, like some of the things we're imagining are that it's not only able to write code, but actually it participates like early on in like the ideation and planning phases of writing software, and then further downstream in terms of like validation, deploying, and like maintaining code. To make that a little more fun, like one thing I like to imagine is like, if you think of what Codex is today, it's a bit like this like really smart intern that like refuses to read Slack and like doesn't check Datadog or like Sentry unless you ask it to. And so like, no matter how smart it is, like how much are you going to trust it to write code without you also working with it, right? So that's how people use it mostly today, is they pair with it. But we want to get to the point where, it can work like just like a new intern that you hire. You don't only ask them to write code, but you ask them to participate across the cycle. And so that like, even if they don't get something right the first try, they're eventually going to be able to iterate their way there.
I thought the point about not reading Slack and Datadog was it's just not distracted. It's just constantly focused and is always in flow. But I get what you're saying there is it doesn't have all the context on everything that's going on.
And like, that's not only true when it's performing a task, but again, if you think of like the best human teammates, like you don't tell them what to do, right? Like maybe when you first hire them, you have like a couple meetings and you're like, hey, like you kind of learn like, okay, these prompts work for this teammate. These prompts don't, right? This is how to communicate with this person. Then eventually you give them some starter tasks, you delegate a few tasks. But then eventually you just say like, hey, great, okay, you're working with this set of people in this area of the code base. Feel free to work with other people in other parts of the code base too, even. And you tell me what you think makes sense to be done, right? And so, we think of this as like proactivity, and like one of our major goals with Codex is to like get to proactivity. I think this is like critically important to like achieve the mission of OpenAI, which is to deliver the benefits of AGI to all humanity. I like to joke today that like AI products, and it's a half joke, they're actually like really hard to use because you have to like be very thoughtful about when it could help you. And if you're not prompting a model to help you, it's probably not helping you at that time. And if you think of how many times like the average user is prompting AI today, it's probably like tens of times. But if you think of how many times people could actually get benefit from a really intelligent entity, it's thousands of times per day. And so a large part of our goal with Codex is to figure out like, what is the shape of an actual teammate agent that is sort of helpful by default?
When people think about Cursor and even Claude Code, it's like a IDE that helps you code and kind of auto-completes code and maybe does some agentic work. What I'm hearing here is the vision is different, which is it's a teammate. It's like a remote teammate building code for you that you talk to and ask to do things. And it also does IDE, autocomplete, and things like that. Is that a kind of a differentiator in the way you think about Codex?
It's basically this idea that like, we want the way, like if you're a developer and you're trying to get something done, we want you to just feel like you have superpowers and you're able to move much, much faster. But we don't think that in order for you to reap those benefits, you need to be sitting there constantly thinking about like, how can I invoke AI at this point to do this thing? We want you to be able to sort of like plug it in to the way that you work and have it just start to do stuff without you having to think about it.
Okay. I have a lot of questions along those lines, but just how's it going? Is there any stats, any numbers you can share about how Codex is doing?
Yeah, Codex has been growing like absolutely explosively since the launch of GPT-5 back in August. There's definitely some interesting like product insights to talk about as to like how we unlock that growth if you're interested. But again, the last stat we shared there was like we were like well over 10x since August. In fact, it's been like 20x since then. Also, the Codex models are serving many trillions of tokens a week now, and it's basically like our most served coding model. One of the really cool things that we've seen is that the way that we decided to set up the Codex team was to build a really tightly integrated product and research team that are iterating on the model and the harness together. And it turns out that lets you just do a lot more and try many more experiments as to how these things will work together. And so we were just training these models for use in our first party harness that we were very opinionated about. And then what we've started to see more recently actually is that other major sort of API coding customers are now starting to adopt these models as well. And so we've reached a point where actually the Codex model is the most served coding model in the API as well.
You hinted at this, what unlocked this growth. I am extremely interested in hearing that. It felt like before, I don't know, maybe this was before you joined the team. It just felt like Claude Code was killing it. Just everyone was sitting on top of Claude Code. It was by far the best way to code. And then all of a sudden Codex comes around. I remember Karpathy tweeted that he just like has never seen a model like this. I think the tweet was the gnarliest bugs that he runs into that he just spends hours trying to figure out. Nothing else is solved. He gives it to Codex, lets it run for an hour, and it solves it. What'd you guys do?
We have this strong sort of mission here at OpenAI to, basically to build AGI. And so we think a lot about how can we shape the product so that it can scale, right? Earlier I was mentioning like, hey, like if you're an engineer, you should be getting help from AI like thousands of times per day, right? And so we thought a lot about the primitives for that when we launched our first version of Codex, which was Codex Cloud. And that was basically a product that had its own computer, it lived in the cloud, you could delegate to it. And, the coolest part about that was you could run many, many tasks in parallel. But some of the challenges that we saw are that it's a little bit harder to set that up, both in terms of like environment configuration, like giving the model the tools it needs to validate its changes, and to learn how to prompt in that way. And sort of my analogy for this is going back to this teammate analogy. It's like if you hired a teammate, but you're never allowed to get on a call with them, and you can only go back and forth, asynchronously over time. Like that works for some teammates. And eventually that's actually how you want to spend most of your time. So that's still the future, but it's hard to initially adopt. And so we still have that vision of like, that's what we're trying to get you to, a teammate that you delegate to and that is proactive. And we're seeing that growing. But the key unlock is actually first, you need to land with users in a way that's like much more intuitive and like trivial to get value from. So the way that most people discover, like the vast majority of users discover Codex today, is either they download an IDE extension or they run it in their CLI, and the agent works there with you on your computer interactively. And it works within a sandbox, which is actually like a really cool piece of tech to help that be safe and secure. But it has access to all those dependencies. So if the agent needs to do something, like it needs to run a command, it can do so within the sandbox. We don't have to set up any environment. And if it's a command that doesn't work in the sandbox, it can just ask you. And so you can get into this like really strong feedback loop using the model. And then over time, like our team's job is to like help turn that feedback loop into you sort of as a byproduct of using the product, configuring it so that you can then be delegating to it down the line. And again, analogy, keep coming back to it, but like if you hire a teammate and you ask them to do work, but you just give them like a fresh computer from the store, it's going to be hard for them to do their job, right? Mm. But if as you work with them side by side, you can be like, oh, you don't have a password for this service we use. Here's the password for this service. Yeah, don't worry, feel free to run this command. Then it's like much easier for them to then go off and do work for hours without you.
So what I'm hearing is the initial version of Codex was almost too far in the future. It's like a remote in the cloud. agent that's coding for you asynchronously. And what you did is, okay, let's actually come back a little bit. Let's integrate into the way engineers already integrate into IDs and locally and help them kind of on ramp to this new world.
Totally. And it was quite interesting because we dog food product a ton at OpenAI. So, dog food, as in we use our own product. And so Codex has been accelerating OpenAI over the course of the entire year. And the cloud product was a massive accelerant to the company as well. It just turns out that this was one of those places where the signal we got from dog fooding is a little bit different from the signal you get from like the general market, because at OpenAI, we train reasoning models all day. And so we're very used to this kind of prompting and like, think up front, run things massively in parallel. And, it would take some time and then come back to it later asynchronously. And so, now when we build, we still get a ton of signal from dog fooding internally, but, we're also very cognizant of like the different ways that different audiences use the product.
That's really funny. It's like live in the future, but maybe not too far in the future. And I could see how everyone at OpenAI is living very far in the future, and sometimes that won't work for everyone.
Yeah.
What about just like intelligence training data? I don't know. Is there something else that helped Codex accelerate its ability to actually code? Is it like better, cleaner data? Is it more just models advancing? Is there anything else that really helped accelerate?
Yeah, so there's like a few components here. I guess, you were mentioning models, and the models have improved a ton. In fact, just last Wednesday, we shipped GPT-5.1 Codex Max, a very, accurately named model. That is awesome. It is awesome both because it is for any given task that you were using GPT-5.1 Codex for, it's like, roughly 30% faster at accomplishing that task. But also it unlocks a ton of intelligence. So if you use it at our higher reasoning levels, it's just like even smarter. And that feedback or that tweet you were saying, like Karpathy made about like, hey, give this your gnarliest bugs. Like, obviously there's a ton going on in the market right now, but like Codex Max is definitely like carrying that mantle of, tackling the hardest bugs. So that is super cool. But I will say it's like some of how we're thinking about this is evolving a little bit from being like, yeah, we're just going to think about the model and like, let's just like train the best model, to really thinking about like, what is an agent actually overall, right? And, I'm not going to try to define agent exactly, but at least the stack that we think of it as having is it's like, you have this model, really smart reasoning model that knows how to do a specific kind of task really well. So we can talk about how we make that possible. But then actually we need to serve that model through an API into a harness. And both of those things also have a really big role here. So for instance, one of the things that we're really proud of is you can have GPT-5.1 Codex Max work for really long periods of time. That's not like normal, but you can set it up to do that, or that might happen. But now routinely we'll hear about people saying like, yeah, it ran like overnight, or it ran for 24 hours. And so, for a model to work continuously for that amount of time, it's going to exceed its context window. And so we have a solution for that, which we call compaction. But compaction is actually a feature that uses like all three layers of that stack. So you need to have a model that has a concept of compaction and knows like, okay, as I start to approach this context window, I might be asked to like prepare to be run in a new context window. And then at the API layer, you need an API that like understands this concept and like has an endpoint that you can hit to do this change. And at the harness layer, you need a harness that can like prepare the payload for this to be done. And so like shipping this compaction feature that now just like made this behavior possible to like anyone using Codex actually meant working across all three things. And I think that's like increasingly going to be true. Another maybe like underappreciated version of this is if you think about all the different coding products out there, they all have like very different tool harnesses with like very different opinions on how the model should work. And so if you want to train a model to be good at like all the different ways it could work, like, maybe you have a strong opinion that it should work using semantic search, right? Maybe you have a strong opinion that it should like call bespoke tools. Or maybe you have like, in our case, a strong opinion that it should just use like the shell and work in the terminal. You can move much faster if you're just optimizing for one of those worlds, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way that we built Codex is that it just uses the shell, but in order to make that like safer and secure, we have a sandbox that the model is used to operating in. So I think one of the biggest accelerants, to go all the way back to your answer to your question, is just like, we're building all three things in parallel and like kind of tuning each one and, constantly experimenting with how those things work with like a tightly integrated product and research team.
How do you think you win in this space? do you think it'll always be this kind of like race with other models constantly kind of leapfrogging each other? Do you think there's a world where someone just runs away with it and no one else can ever catch up? Is there like a path to just we win?
Again, comes back to this idea of like building a teammate, and not just a teammate that, participates in team planning and prioritization, not just a teammate that, really tests its code and like helps you maintain and deploy it, but even a teammate, like if you think, again, an engineering teammate, they can also like schedule a calendar invite, right? Or move stand up or do whatever, right? And so in my mind, if we just imagine that every day or every week, some like crazy new capability is just going to be deployed by a research lab, it's just impossible for us, like, as humans to keep up and like use all this technology. And so I think we need to get to this world where you kind of just have like an AI teammate or a super assistant that you just talk to, and it just knows how to be helpful like on its own, right? And so you don't have to be like reading the latest tips for how to use it. You just like, you've plugged it in and it just provides help. And so that's kind of the shape of what I think we're building. And I think that will be like a very sticky, like winning product if we can do so. So the shape that in my head, at least I have, is that we build, maybe a fun topic is like, is chat the right interface for AI? I actually think chat is a very good interface when you don't know what you're supposed to use it for. In the same way that if I think of like, I'm like on MS Teams or in Slack with a teammate, chat is pretty good. I can ask for whatever I want, right? It's kind of the common denominator for everything. So you can chat with a super assistant about whatever topic you want, whether it be coding or not. And then if you are like a functional expert in a specific domain, such as coding, there's like a GUI that you can pull up to go really deep and like look at the code and like work with the code. So I think like what we need to build as OpenAI is basically this idea of like, you have ChatGPT, and that is a tool that's like ubiquitously available to like everyone. You start using it even like outside of work, right? To just help you. You become very comfortable with the idea of being accelerated with AI. And so then you get to work and you just can naturally just, I'm just going to ask it for this. And I don't need to know about all the connectors or like all the different features. I'm just going to ask it for help, and it'll surface to me the best way that it can help at this point in time. And maybe even chime in when I didn't ask it for help. So in my mind, if we can get to that, I think that's how we really build like the winning product.
This is so interesting because with my chat with Nick Charlie, the head of ChatGPT, I think he shared that the original name for ChatGPT was Super Assistant or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that there's like that approach to the Super Assistant, and then there's this Codex approach. It's almost like the B2C version and the B2B version. And what I'm hearing is the idea here is, okay, you start with coding and building, and then it's doing all this other stuff for you, scheduling meetings, I don't know, probably posting in Slack, I don't know, shipping designs. I don't know. Is the idea there, this is like the business version of ChatGPT in a sense, or is there something else there?
Yeah. So, so we're getting to the 1 year time horizon conversation. A lot of this might happen sooner, but in terms of fuzziness, I think we're at the 1 year. So I'll give you like a contention and like a plausible way we get there. But as for how it happens, who knows? Mm-hmm. So basically, if we're going to build a super assistant, it has to be able to do things, right? So like, we're going to have a model and it's going to be able to do stuff affecting your world. And one of the learnings I think we've seen over the past year or so is that for models to do stuff, they're much more effective when they can use a computer, right? Okay, so now we're like, okay, we need the super assistant that can use a computer, right? Or many computers. And now the question is, okay, well, how should it use the computer, right? And there's lots of ways to use a computer. You could try to hack the OS and like use accessibility APIs. Maybe a bit easier is you could point and click. That's a little slow, and unpredictable sometimes. And another way, it turns out the best way for models to use computers is simply to write code, right? And so we're kind of getting to this idea where like, well, if you want to build any agent, maybe you should be building a coding agent. And maybe to the user, a non-technical user, they won't even know they're using a coding agent, the same way that no one thinks about, are they using the internet or not? It's just, they're more just like, is Wi-Fi on, right? So I think that what we're doing with Codex is we're building a software engineering teammate. And as part of that, we're kind of building an agent that can use a computer by writing code. And so we're already seeing like some pull for this. It's like quite early, but we're starting to see people like who are using Codex for like coding adjacent product purposes. And so as that develops, I think we'll just naturally see that like, oh, it turns out like we should just always have the agent write code if there is a coding way to solve a problem instead of, even if you're doing a financial analysis, right? Like maybe write some code for that. So basically like, you were like, hey, is this like the two ends of this product for the super assistant, right? Of ChatGPT. in my mind, like just coding is a core competency of any agent, including ChatGPT. And so like what we think we're building is like that competency. But so here's like the really cool thing about agents writing code is that you can import code, right? Code is like composable, interoperable, right? Because if we, one very reductive view we could have for an agent is it's just going to be given a computer and it's just going to like point and click and go around. But, that is the future. And then how we get there is difficult to sort of chart a path, because a lot of the questions around building agents aren't like, can the agent do it? But it's more about, well, how can we help the agent understand the context that it's working in? And like the team that's using it, probably has a way that they like to do things. They have guidelines. They probably want certain deterministic guarantees about what the agent can or cannot do. Or they want to know that the agent understands sort of this detail. Like an example would be, if we're looking at a crash reporting tool, hitting a connector for it, every sub-team probably has a different meta prompt for like how they want the crashes to be analyzed, right? And so we start to get to this thing where like, yeah, we have this agent sitting in front of a computer, but we need to make that configurable for the team or for the user, right? And let them like stuff that the agent does often, we probably just want to like build in as a competency that this agent has that it can do. So I think we end up with this generalizable thing that you were saying of like an agent that can just write its own scripts for whatever it wants to do. But I think that the really key part here is, can we make it so that everything that the agent has to do often or that it does well, we can just like remember and store so that the agent doesn't have to write a script for that again, right? Or maybe like if I just joined a team and you are already on the same team as me, I can just like use all those scripts that the agents had written already.
Yeah, it's like if this is our teammate, they can share things that it's learned from working with other people at the company. It just makes sense as a metaphor.
Yeah.
It feels like you're in the Karpathy camp of agents today are not that great and mostly slop, and maybe in the future they'll be awesome. Does that resonate?
I think coding agents are pretty great. I think we're seeing a ton of value there.
Right. Yep.
And then I think like agents outside of coding, it's still like very early. And this is just my opinion, but I think they're going to get a whole lot better once they can use coding too in a composable way. It's kind of the fun part of like when you're building for software engineers. Like at my startup, we were building for software engineers too for a lot of that journey. And they're just such a fun audience to build for, because they also like building for themselves and are often like even more creative than we are in thinking about how to use the technology. And so like by building for software engineers, you get to just observe a ton of emergent behaviors and like things that you should do and build into the product.
I love how you say that, because a lot of people building for engineers get really annoyed because the engineers they're just always complaining about stuff. They're like, this sucks. So why'd you build it this way? I love that you enjoy it, but I think it's probably because you're building such an amazing tool for engineers that can actually solve problems and just, code for them. Kind of along those lines, there's always this talk of what will happen with jobs, engineers, coding. Do you have to learn coding, all these things? Clearly, the way you're describing it is it's a teammate. It's going to work with you, make you more superhuman. It's not going to replace you. What's the way you just think about the impact on the field of engineering, having this super intelligent engineering teammate?
I think there's two sides to it, but the one we were just talking about is this idea that maybe every agent should actually use code and be a coding agent. And in my mind, that's just like a small part of this like broader idea that like, hey, as we make code even more ubiquitous, I mean, you could probably claim it's ubiquitous today, even pre-AI, right? But as we make code even more ubiquitous, it's actually just going to be used for many more purposes. And so there's just going to be a ton more need for people with this, like humans with this competency. So that's my view. I think this is like quite a complex topic. So, it's something we talk about a lot and we have to kind of see how it pans out. But I think what we can do basically as a product team building in the space is just try to always think about how are we building a tool so that it feels like we're like maximally accelerating people, rather than building a tool that makes it like more unclear what you should do as the human, right? Like I think like to give an example right now, like nowadays when you work with a coding agent, it writes a ton of code, but it turns out writing code is actually one of the most fun parts of software engineering for many software engineers. And so then you end up reviewing AI code, right? And that's often a less fun part of the job for many software engineers, right? And so I actually think like we see that like this plays out all the time in like a ton of micro decisions. And so we as a product team are always thinking about like, okay, how do we make this more fun? How do we make you feel more empowered? Where is this not working? And I would argue that like reviewing agent written code is like a place that today is like less fun. And so, then I think, okay, what can we do about that? Well, we can ship a code review feature that like helps you build confidence in the AI written code. Okay, cool. Another thing we could do is we can make it so that the agent's like better able to validate its work. And, it gets all the way down into like micro decisions. Like if you're going to have an agent capability to validate work, and let's say you have like, I'm thinking of Codex Web right now, like you have a pane that sort of reflects the work the agent did. What do you see first? Do you see the diff or do you see the image preview of the code it wrote? Right. And, I think if you're thinking about this from perspective, like how do I empower the human? How do I make them feel like as accelerated as possible? Like you obviously see the image first, right? You shouldn't be reviewing the code unless first, you've seen the image, unless maybe it's been like reviewed by an AI and now it's time for you to take a look.
When I had Michael Churell, the CEO of Cursor, on the podcast, he had this kind of vision of us moving to something beyond code. And I've seen this rise of something called spec-driven development, where you kind of just write the spec and then the code, the AI writes code for you. And so you kind of start working at this higher abstraction level. Is that something you see where we're going, just like engineers not having to actually write code or look at code, and there's going to be this higher level of abstraction that we focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like constantly these levels of abstraction, and they're actually already played out today, right? Like today, like coding agents, mostly it's like prompts to patch, right? We're starting to see people doing like spec-driven development or like plan-driven development. That's actually one of the ways when people ask like, hey, how do you run Codex on a really long task? Well, it's like often collaborate with it first to write like a plan.md, like a markdown file that's your plan. And once you're happy with that, then you ask it to go off and do work. And if that plan has verifiable steps, it'll like work for much longer. So we're totally seeing that. I think spec-driven development is like an interesting idea. It's not clear to me that it'll work out that way because a lot of people don't like writing specs either. But it seems plausible that some people will work that way. Like a bit of a joke idea though is like if you think of like the way that many teams work today, they often like don't necessarily have specs, but the team is just really self-driven, and so stuff just gets done. And so almost that is like, I'm coming up with this on the spot, so it's not a good name, but like chatter-driven development, where it's just like stuff is happening, on social media and like in your team communications tools, and then as a result, like code gets written and deployed, right? So yeah, I think I'm a little bit more oriented in that way of, I don't even necessarily want to have to write a spec. Like sometimes I want to, only if I like writing specs, right? Other times I might just want to say like, hey, here's like the customer, service channel, and like, tell me what's interesting to know. But if it's a small bug, just fix it. I don't have to write a spec for that, right? I have this sort of hypothetical future that I like to share sometimes with people as a provocation, which is like, in a world where we have like truly amazing agents, like what does it look like to be a solopreneur? One terrible idea for how it could look is that there's a mobile app, and every idea that the agent has to do is just like vertical video on your phone. And then you can like swipe left if you think it's a bad idea, and you can like swipe right if it's a good idea. And like you can press and hold and like speak to your phone if you want to get feedback on the idea before you swipe. And in this world, like basically what your job is just to like plug in this app into like every single like signal system, system of record. And then you just sort of sit back and like swipe. I don't know.
I love this. So this is like Tinder meets TikTok meets Codex.
It's pretty terrible.
No, this is great. So the idea here is this agent is watching and listening to you, paying attention to the market, your users. And it's like, cool, here's something I should do. It's like a proactive engineer, just like, here, we should build this feature, fix this thing.
Exactly.
I think that's a really good idea.
Communicating with you in like the lowest effort
and like
way for you to
the
consume
gems, like the modern way to communicate.
Yeah.
Swipe left or right and vertical feed. And then the Sora video. Okay, so I see how this all connects now. I see.
Yeah. To be clear, we're not building that, but like, it's a fun idea. I mean, like in this example though, like one of the things that it's doing is it's consuming external signals, right? I think the other really interesting thing is like, if we think about like, what is the most successful like AI product to date? I would argue, it's funny, actually, not to confuse things at all, but like the first time we used the brand Codex at OpenAI was actually the model powering GitHub Copilot. This is like way back in the day, years ago. So we decided to reuse that brand recently because it's just so good. It's, Codex, code execution. But I think actually like auto completion in IDEs is like one of the most successful AI products to date. And part of what's so magical about it is that when it can surface like ideas for helping you really rapidly. When it's right, you're accelerated. When it's wrong, it's not like that annoying. It can be annoying, but it's not that annoying, right? And so you can create this like mixed initiative system that's like contextually responding to like what you're attempting to do. And so in my mind, this is like a really interesting thing for us as OpenAI as we're building. So for instance, when I think about launching a browser, which we did with Atlas, right? Like in my mind, one of the really interesting things we can then do is we can then like contextually surface like ways that we can help you as you're going about your day, right? And so we break out of this like, we're just looking at code or we're just in your terminal into this idea that like, hey, like a real teammate is dealing with a lot more than just code, right? They're dealing with a lot of things that are web content. So like, how can we help you with that?
Man, there's so much there. I love this. Okay, so autocomplete on web with the browser. That's so interesting. Just like, here's all the things that we can help you with as you're browsing and going about your day. I want to talk about Atlas. I'll come back to that. Code execution. Did not know that. That's really clever. I get it now. Okay, and then this chatter. What is it? Chatter-driven development. I had no. This is a really good idea. But it reminds me, I had Donji on the podcast, CTO of Block, and they have this product called Goose, which is their own internal agent thing. And he talked about an engineer at Block just has Goose watch him with like his screen and listens to every meeting and proactively does work that he will probably want to do. So ships a PR, sends an email, drafts a Slack message. So he's doing exactly what you're describing in kind of a very early way.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I bet you so if we went and asked them what the bottleneck to that productivity is, did they share what it is?
Probably looking at it, just making sure this is the right thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So like we see this now, like we have a Slack integration for Codex. People love, if there's like something that you need to do quickly, people will just like mention Codex, like, why do you think this bug is happening, right? Doesn't have to be an engineer, even like maybe, data scientists often here are using Codex a ton to just like answer questions like, why do you think this metric moved? What happened? So questions, you get the answer right back in Slack. It's amazing, super useful. But when it's writing code, then you have to go back and look at the code, right? And so the real, I think bottleneck right now is like validating that the code worked and like writing code review. So in my mind, if we wanted to get to something like, that a friend you were talking about, world, I think we really need to figure out how to get people to configure their coding agents to be much more autonomous on those later stages of the work.
It makes sense. Like you said, writing code. I used to be an engineer. I was an engineer for 10 years. Really fun to write code, really fun to just get in the flow, build, architect, test. Not so fun to look at everyone else's code and just have to go through and be on the hook if it is doing something dumb that's going to take down production. And now that building has become easier. What I've always heard from companies that are really at the cutting edge of this is the bottleneck is now like figuring out what to build. And then it's at the end of like, okay, we have all 100 PRs to review. Who's going to go through all that?
Right.
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by Jira Product Discovery. The hardest part of building products isn't actually building products. It's everything else. It's proving that the work matters, managing stakeholders, trying to plan ahead. Most teams spend more time reacting than learning, chasing updates, justifying roadmaps, and constantly unblocking work to keep things moving. Jira Product Discovery puts you back in control. With Jira Product Discovery, you can capture insights and prioritize high-impact ideas. It's flexible, so it adapts to the way your team works and helps you build a roadmap that drives alignment, not questions. And because it's built on Jira, you can track ideas from strategy to delivery, all in one place. Less chasing, more time to think, learn, and build the right thing. Get Jira Product Discovery for free at Atlassian.com/Lenny. That's Atlassian.com/Lenny. What has the impact of Codex been on the way you operate as a product person, as a PM? It's clear how engineering is impacted. Code is written for you. What has it done to the way you operate and the way PMs operate at OpenAI?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly I just feel like much more empowered. I've always been sort of more technical leaning PM. And especially when I'm working on products for engineers, I feel like it's necessary to dog food the product. But even beyond that, I just feel like I can do much, much more as a PM. And, Scott Belsky talks about this idea of compressing the talent stack. I'm not sure if I've phrased that right, but it's basically this idea that maybe the boundaries between these roles are a little bit less needed than before because people can just do much more. And every time you someone can do more, you can like skip one communication boundary and make the team like that much more efficient, right? So I think we see it, in a bunch of functions now. But I guess since you asked about like product specifically, now like answering questions much easier. You can just ask Codex for thoughts on that. A lot of like PM type work, understanding what's changing. Again, just ask Codex for help with that. Prototyping is often faster than writing specs. This is something that a lot of people have talked about. I think something that I don't think it's super surprising, but something that's slightly surprising is like we see, like we're mostly building Codex to write code that's going to be deployed to production. But actually we see a lot of throwaway code written with Codex now. It's kind of going back to this idea of like, ubiquitous code. So you'll see, someone wants to do an analysis. Like if I want to understand something, it's like, okay, just give Codex a bunch of data, but then ask it to build like an interactive like data viewer for this data, right? That's just like too annoying to do in the past, but now it's just like totally worth the time of just getting an agent to go do something. Similarly, I've seen like some pretty cool prototypes on our design team about like, if you want to, like a designer basically wanted to build an animation, and this is the coin animation in Codex. And it was like, normally it'd be too annoying to program this animation. So they just vibe coded a animation editor. And then they use the animation editor to build the animation, which they then inject into the repo. Actually, our designers there's a ton of acceleration there. And like, speaking of compressing the talent stack, I think our designers are very PME. So, they do a ton of product work, and like, they actually have like an entire like vibe coded sort of side prototype of the Codex app. And so a lot of how we talk about things is like, we'll have like a really quick jam because there's like 10,000 things going on. And then the designer will like go think about how this should work. But instead of like talking about it again, they'll just like vibe code a prototype of that in their like standalone prototype. We'll play with it. If we like it, they'll vibe code that prototype or vibe engineer that prototype into an actual PR to land. And then depending on their comfort with the code base, like Codex CLIs in Rust is a little harder. Maybe they'll like land it themselves, or they'll like get close and then an engineer can help them like land the PR. We recently shipped the Sora Android app. And that was one of the most sort of mind-blowing examples of acceleration, actually, because usage of Codex internally at OpenAI is obviously really high, but it's been growing over the course of the year, both in terms of like, now it's basically like all technical staff use it, but even like the intensity and know-how of how to make the most of coding agents has gone up by a ton. And so the Sora Android app, right, like a fully new app, we built it in 18 days. It went from like 0 to launch to employees. And then 10 days later, so 28 days total, we went to just like GA to the public. And that was done just like with the help of Codex. So pretty insane velocity. I would say it was like a little bit, I don't want to say easy mode, but there is one thing that Codex is really good at if you're a company that's like building software on multiple platforms. So you've already figured out like some of the underlying like APIs or systems. Asking Codex to port things over is really effective because it has like something you can go look at. And so the engineers on that team were basically having Codex go look at the iOS app, produce plans of work that needed to be done, and then go implement those. And it was kind of looking at iOS and Android at the same time. And so, basically it was like 2 weeks to launch to employees, 4 weeks total. Insanely fast.
What makes that even more insane is it became the #1 app in the App Store. This just boggles the mind. Okay, so
yeah, so imagine it was the #1 app in the App Store with like a handful of engineers. I think it was like 2 or 3 possibly in a handful of weeks. Yeah,
this is absurd.
So so that's a really fun example of acceleration. And then like Atlas is the other one that I think Ben did a podcast, the Eng lead on Atlas, sharing a little bit about how we built there. Atlas is actually, I mean, it's a browser, right? And building a browser is really hard. And so we had to build a lot of difficult systems in order to do that. And basically we got to the point where that team has a ton of power users of Codex right now. And, got to the point where they were basically, we were talking to them about it because a lot of those engineers are people I used to work with before my startup. And so they'd say, before this would have taken us like 2 to 3 weeks for 2 to 3 engineers. And now it's like 1 engineer, 1 week. So massive acceleration there as well. And what's quite cool is that, we shipped Atlas on Mac first, but now we're working on the Windows version. so the team now is like ramping up on Windows, and they're helping us make Codex better on Windows too, which is admittedly earlier. Like just the model we shipped last week is the first model that natively understands PowerShell. So, PowerShell being the native like shell language on Windows. So yeah, it's been really awesome to see like the whole company getting accelerated by Codex, like and most obviously also research and like improving how quickly we train models and how well we do it. And then even like design, as we talked about, and marketing. Like actually we're at this point now where my product marketer is often also making string changes just directly from Slack, or like updating docs directly from Slack.
These are amazing examples. You guys are living at the bleeding edge of what is possible, and this is how other companies are going to work. Just shipping, again, what became the number one app in the App Store and just beloved all over. It just like took over the world for at least a week. Built, you said, in 28 days and 10 days, 18 days just to get like the core of it working.
Yeah, so like 18 days, we had a thing that employees were playing with,
Yeah.
and then 10 days later, we were out.
And you said just a couple engineers.
Yeah.
2 or 3. Okay. And then Atlas, you said, took a week to build.
No. So Atlas,
Okay.
not the whole week, but Atlas was like a really meaty project.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to one of the engineers on Atlas about like, just what they use Codex for. And it's basically like, we use Codex for absolutely everything. And I was like, okay, well, like, how would you measure the acceleration? And so basically the answer I got back was, previously it would have taken 2 to 3 weeks for 2 to 3 engineers. And now it's like 1 engineer, 1 week.
Do you think this eventually moves to non-engineers doing this sort of thing? Like, does it have to be an engineer building this thing? Could sort of been built by a PM or a designer?
I think we will very much get to the point where basically where the boundaries are a little bit blurred, right? Like, I think you're going to want someone who's like understands the details of what they're building, but what details those are will evolve. Kind of like how now, like if you're writing Swift, you don't have to speak assembly. There's a handful of people in the world, and it's really important that they exist and like speak assembly, maybe more than a handful, right? But that's like a specialized function that like most companies don't need to have. So I think we're just going to naturally see like an increase in layers of abstraction. And then the cool thing is now we're entering like the language layer of abstraction, like natural language. And then natural language itself is really flexible, right? Like you could have engineers talking about like a plan, and then you could have engineers talking about a spec, and then you could have engineers talking about just a product or an idea. So I think we can also like start moving up those layers of abstraction as well. But I do think this is going to be gradual. I don't think it's going to go to like all of a sudden like nobody ever writes anything and like any code and it's just specs. I think it's going to be much more like, okay, we've set up our coding agent to be really good at like previewing the build or like at running tests. Maybe that's the first part, right? That most people have set up. And it's like, okay, now we've set it up so that it can like execute the build and it can like see the results of its own changes. But we haven't yet built a good integration harness so that it can like, in the case of Atlas, like, by the way, I don't know if they've done any of this or not. I think they've done a lot of this, but maybe the next stage is like enable it to like load a few sample pages to see how well those work, right? So then, okay, now we're going to like set up to do that. And I think for some time, at least, we're going to have humans kind of curating like which of these connectors or systems or components that the agent needs to be good at talking to. And then, in the future, there will be an even greater unlock where Codex tells you how to set it up, or maybe sets itself up in a repo.
What a wild time to be alive. Wow. I'm curious just the second order effects of this sort of thing, just how quickly it is to build stuff. What does that do? Does that mean distribution becomes much, much more important? Does it mean ideas are just worth a lot more? It's interesting to think about how that changes.
I'm curious what you think. I still don't think ideas are worth as much as maybe a lot of people think. Still think execution is really hard, right? Like you can build something fast, but you still need to execute well on it. It still needs to make sense and be a coherent thing overall. And distribution is massive.
Yeah, just feels like everything else is now more important. Everything that isn't the building piece, which is coming up with an idea, getting to market, profit, all that kind of stuff.
I think we might have been in this weird temporary phase where, for a while, like you could just, it was so hard to build product that you mostly just had to be really good at building product, and it maybe didn't matter if you like had an intimate understanding of a specific customer. But now I think we're getting to this point where actually, like, if I could only choose like one thing to understand, it would be like really meaningful understanding of like the problems that a certain customer has, right? If I could only go in with one like core competency. So I think that's that's ultimately still what's going to matter most, right? Like if you're starting a new company today and you have like a really good understanding and like network of customers that are currently underserved by AI tools, I think you're set, right? Whereas if you're like good at building like, websites, but you don't have any specific customer to build for, I think you're in for a much harder time.
Bullish on vertical AI startups is what I'm hearing. Yeah, I completely agree. There's like, there's like the general thing that can solve a lot of problems. And then there's like, we're going to solve presentations incredibly well. And we're going to understand the presentation problem better than anyone. And we're going to plug into your workflows and all these other things that matter for a very specific problem. Okay, incredible. When you think about progress on Codex, I imagine you have a bunch of evals and there's all these public benchmarks. What's something you look at to tell you, okay, we're making really good progress? I imagine it's not going to be the one thing, but what do you focus on? What's like something you're trying to push? What's like a KPI or two?
One of the things that I'm constantly reminding myself of is that a tool like Codex sort of naturally is a tool that you would, become a power user of, right? And so we can accidentally spend a lot of our time thinking about features that are like very deep in the user adoption journey. And so we can kind of end up over solving for that. And so I think it's like just critically important to like go look at like your like D7 retention, right? Just go try the product, like sign up from scratch again. I have a few too many like ChatGPT Pro accounts that I've just like, in order to maximally correctly dog food, like signed up for on my Gmail, and they charge me like $200 a month. I need to expense those. But, like I think just like the feeling of being a user and the early retention stats are still like super important for us because, as much as this category is taking off, I think we're still in the very early days of like people using them. Another thing that we do that might be, I think we might be the most like user feedback / social media pilled team out there in this space is like a few of us are like constantly on Reddit and Twitter. And, there's praise up there and there's a lot of complaints, but we take the complaints like very seriously and look at them. And I think that, again, because you can use like coding agent for so many different things, it often is like kind of broken in many sort of ways for like specific behaviors. And so we actually monitor a lot, just like what the vibes are on social media pretty often, especially I think for Twitter X, it's a little bit more hypey. And then Reddit is a little more negative, but real actually. So I've started increasingly paying attention to like how people are talking about using Codex on Reddit actually.
This is important for people to know. Which the subreddits do you check most? Is there like an R Codex or?
I mean, the algorithm is pretty good at surfacing stuff, but like r/Codex is there.
Okay, I'll take. Very interesting. And then if people tag you on Twitter, you still see that, but maybe not as powerful as seeing it on Reddit.
Well, the thing with Twitter is it's a little bit more one-to-one, even if it's like in public. Whereas like with Reddit, there's like really good upvoting mechanics, and like maybe most people are still not bots, unclear. So you get like good signal on what matters and what other people think.
So interestingly, Atlas, I want to talk about that briefly. You guys launched Atlas. I tweeted actually that I tried Atlas and then I don't love the AI only search experience as just like, I just want Google sometimes or whatever, like just waiting for AI to give me an answer. I'm like, I don't want to, and there was no way to switch. So I just tweeted, hey, I'm switching back. It's not great. And I feel like I made some PMs at OpenAI sad and I saw someone tweet, okay, we have this now, which I imagine was always part of the plan. It's probably an example of we got to ship stuff, see how people use it, and then we figure it out. So I guess one is that, I don't know, is there anything there? And two, I'm just curious, why are you guys building a web browser?
So I worked on Atlas for a bit. I don't work on it now. But, like a bit of the narrative here for me, just to tell my story a bit, was like I was working on this like screen sharing, like pair programming startup, right? And then we joined OpenAI. And so the idea was really to build a contextual desktop assistant. And the reason I believe that's so important is because I think that it's really annoying to have to give all your context to an assistant and then to figure out how it can help you, right? And so if it could just like understand what you are trying to do, then it could maximally accelerate you. And so I would, I still think of Codex actually as like a contextual assistant from a little bit of a different angle, like starting with coding tasks. But some of the thinking, at least for me personally, I can't speak for the whole product, but was that a lot of work is done in the web. And if we could build a browser, then we could be contextual for you, but in a much more first-class way. We weren't hacking like other desktop software, which have like very varied support for for like what content they're rendering to the accessibility tree. We wouldn't be relying on screenshots, which are a little bit slower and unreliable. Instead, we could like be in the rendering engine, right? And like extract whatever we needed to help you. And also, I like to think of like, in video games, like, I don't know if you've played like, I don't know, say Halo, right? Like you walk up to an object. I mean, this is true for many games. You press, man, it's been a long time. This is embarrassing. Press X and it just does the right thing, right? And I was one of those guys who always read the instruction manual for every video game that I bought. And I remember the first time I read about a contextual action and I just thought it was like this really cool idea. And, the thing about a contextual action is we need to know what you are attempting to do. We need to have a little bit of context and then we can help. And I think this is critically important because, imagine this world that we reach, right? Where we have agents that are helping you thousands of times per day. Imagine if the only way we could tell you that we helped you is if we could like push notify you. So you get 1,000 push notifications a day of an AI saying like, hey, I did this thing. Do you like it? It'd be super annoying, right? Whereas imagine going back to software engineering, like I was looking at a dashboard and I noticed some like key metric had like gone down. And, at that point in time, an AI could like maybe go take a look and then surface the fact that it has an opinion on why this metric went down and maybe a fix right there, right when I'm looking at the dashboard, right? That would much more keep me in flow and enable the agent to take action on like many more things. So in my mind, like part of why I'm excited for us to have a browser is that I think we have then like much more context around like what we should help with. Users have much more control over what they want us to look at. It's like, hey, if you want us to like take action on something, you can open it in your AI browser. If you don't, then you can open it in your other browser, right? So like really clear control and boundaries. And then we have the ability to build UX that's like mixed initiative so that we can surface contextual actions to you like at the time that they're helpful, as opposed to just like randomly notifying you.
Hearing the vision for Codex being the super assistant, it's not just there to code for you. It's trying to do a lot for you as a teammate, as this kind of super teammate, and that makes you awesome at work. So I get this. Speaking of that, are there other non-engineering common use cases for Codex? Just ways that non-engineers, we talked about it, designers, prototyping, and building stuff. Are there any, I don't know, fun or unexpected ways people are using Codex that aren't engineers?
I mean, there's a load of unexpected ways, but I think like most of where we're seeing like real traction with people using things are still for now like very like, I would say coding adjacent or like sort of tech oriented places where there's like a mature ecosystem, or maybe you're doing data analysis or something like that. I personally am expecting that we're going to see a lot more of that over time. But for now, like we're keeping the team like very focused on just coding for now because there's so much more work to do.
For people that are thinking about trying out Codex, is there like does it work for all kinds of code bases? What code does it support? If you're like, I don't know, SAP, can you add Codex and start building things? What's kind of like the sweet spot? Where does it start to not be amazing yet?
I'm really glad you asked this question actually, because the best way to try Codex is to give it your hardest tasks, which is a little different than some of the other coding agents. Like, some tools you might think, okay, let me like start easy or just like, like vibe code something random and decide if I like the tool. Whereas like, we're really building Codex to be the like professional tool that you can give your like hardest problems to. And that writes like high quality code in your like enormous code base that is in fact not perfect right now. So yeah, I think if you're going to try Codex, you want to try it on like a real task that you have and not necessarily like dumb that task down to something that's like trivial, but actually like, like a good one would be like you have a hard bug and you don't know what's causing that bug and you ask Codex to like help figure that out or like to implement that, the fix.
I love that answer. Just give it your hardest problem.
I will say like, if you're like, hey, okay, well, the hardest problem I have is that I need to build like a new unicorn business. Like obviously that, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Not yet. So I think it's like, give it like the hardest problem, but something that is still like one like question, right? Or one task to start. That's if you're testing. And then over time, you can learn how to use it for like bigger things.
Yeah. What languages does it support?
Basically, the way we've trained Codex is like, there's a distribution of languages that we support, and it's like fairly aligned with like the frequency of these languages in the world. So unless you're writing some like very esoteric language or like some private language, it should do fine in your language.
If someone was just getting started, is there a tip you could share to help them be successful? Like if you could just whisper a little tip into someone just setting up Codex for the first time to help them have a really good time. What's something you'd whisper?
I might say, try a few things in parallel, right? So you could try giving it a hard task, um, maybe ask it to understand the code base, formulate a plan with it around an idea that you have, and kind of build your way up from there. And like, sort of the meta idea here is it's like you're building trust with the new teammate, right? And so like you wouldn't go to a new teammate and just give them like, hey, do this thing. Here's zero context. You would start by like first making sure they understand the code base, and then you would like maybe align on a plan and approach, and then you would have them go off and do bit by bit, right? And I think if you use Codex in that way, you'll just sort of naturally start to understand like the different ways of prompting it, because it's a super powerful like agent and model, but it is a little bit different to prompt Codex than other models.
Just a couple more questions. One, we touched on this a little bit. As AI does more and more coding, there's always this question of, should I learn to code? And why should I spend time doing this sort of thing? For people that are trying to figure out what to do with their career, especially if they're into software engineering, computer science, do you think there's specific elements of computer science that are more and more important to lean into? Maybe things they don't need to worry about? Like, what do you think people should be leaning into skill-wise as this becomes more and more of a thing in our workplace?
I think there's like a couple angles you could go at this from. I think the easiest one to think of, at least, is just like be a doer of things. I think that, with coding agents getting better and better over time, it's just what you can do as even like someone in college or a new grad is just like so much more than what that was before. And so I think you just want to be taking advantage of that. And definitely when I'm looking at like hiring folks who are earlier career, it's like definitely something that I think about is how productive are they using the latest tools, right? They should be like super productive. And if you think of it in that way, they actually have like less of a handicap than before versus a more senior career person, because, the divide is actually getting smaller because they've got these amazing coding agents now. So that's one thing, which is like, I guess the advice is just like, learn about whatever you want, but just make sure you spend time doing things, not just like fulfilling homework assignments, I guess. I think the other side of it though, is that it's still deeply worth understanding like what makes a good like overall software system. So I still think that like skills like really strong systems engineering skills, or even like really effective like communication and collaboration with your team, skills like that I think are important, or are going to continue to matter for quite some time. Like I don't think it's going to be like all of a sudden the AI coding agents are just able to build like perfect systems without your help. I think it's going to look much more gradual, where it's like, okay, we have these AI coding agents, they're able to validate their work. It's still important. And like, for example, like I'm thinking of an engineer who was working on Atlas, since we were talking about it. He set up Codex so that it can like verify its own work, which is a little bit non-trivial because of the nature of the Atlas project. So the way that he did that was he actually prompted Codex like, hey, why can't you verify your work? Fix it. And like did that on a loop, right? And so you still like at various phases are going to want a human in the loop to like help configure the coding agent to be effective. And so I think like you still want to be able to reason about that. So maybe it's like less important that you can like type really fast and like you understand exactly how to write. Not that anyone writes a for each loop or something, right? But it is, or you don't need to know how to implement like a specific algorithm. But I think you need to be able to reason about the different systems and like what makes like a software engineering team effective. So I think that's the other really important thing. And then like maybe the last angle that you could take is, I think if you're on the frontier of knowledge for a given thing, I still think that's like deeply interesting to go down, partially because that knowledge is still going to be like, agents aren't going to be as good at that, but also partially because I think that like by trying to advance the frontier of a specific thing, you'll actually like end up like being forced to take advantage of coding agents and like using them to accelerate your own workflow as you go.
What's an example of that when you talk about being at the frontier?
Codex writes a lot of the code that helps like manage its training runs, the key infrastructure. We move pretty fast, and so we have a Codex code review is like catching a lot of mistakes. It's actually caught some like pretty interesting configuration mistakes. And, we're starting to see glimpses of the future where we're actually starting to have Codex even like be on call for its own training, which is pretty interesting. So there's lots there.
Wait, what does that mean to be on call for its own training? So it's running its training and it's like, oh, something broke. Someone needs, and it does it like alert people, or it's like, here, I'm going to fix the problem and restart?
This is an early idea that we're like figuring out. But the basic idea is that, during a training run, there's like a bunch of graphs that like today, like humans are looking at, and it's like really important to like look at those. We call this babysitting.
Because it's very expensive to train, I imagine, and very important to move fast. And
Exactly. And there's a lot of systems underlying the training run. And so like a system could go down, or there could be an error somewhere that gets introduced. And so we might need to like fix it or pause things, or I don't know, there's lots of actions we might need to take. And so basically having Codex like run on a loop to like evaluate how those charts are moving over time is sort of this idea that we have to like how to enable us to like train like way more efficiently.
I love that. This is very much along the lines of, this is the future of agents. Codex isn't just for building code and write. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. Being at OpenAI, I can't not ask about your AGI timeline and how far you think we are from AGI. I know this isn't what you work on, but there's a lot of opinions, a lot of, I don't know, timelines. How far do you think we are from a human version of AI, whatever that means to you?
For me, I think that it's a little bit about like, when do we see the acceleration curves kind of go like this, or I don't know which way I'm mirrored here, right? When do we see the hockey stick? And I think that the current limiting factor, I mean, there's many, but I think a current underappreciated limiting factor is like literally human typing speed or human multitasking speed on like writing prompts, right? And like, you were talking about, it's like, you can have an agent like watch all the work you're doing, but if you don't have the agent also validating its work, then you're still bottlenecked on like, can you go review all that code, right? So my view is that we need to unblock those productivity loops from like humans having to prompt and humans having to like manually validate all the work. And so if we can like rebuild systems to let the agent like be default useful, we'll start unlocking hockey sticks. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be binary. I think it's going to be very dependent on what you're building, right? So like, I would imagine that like next year, if you're a startup and you're building a new pieces, like, some new app or something, it'll be possible for you to set it up on a stack where agents are like much more self-sufficient than not, right? But now let's say, I don't know, you mentioned SAP, right? Let's say you work in SAP, like they have many like complex systems, and they're not going to be able to just like get the agent to be self-sufficient overnight in those systems. So they're going to have to slowly like maybe replace systems or update systems to allow the agent to like handle more of the work end to end. And so basically my sort of long answer to your question, maybe boring answer, is that I think starting next year, we're going to see like early adopters, like starting to like hockey stick their productivity. And then over the years that follow, we're going to see larger and larger companies like hockey stick that productivity. And then somewhere in that fuzzy middle is like when that hockey sticking will be like flowing back into the AI labs. And that's when we'll basically be at the AGI tier.
I love this answer. It's very practical. And it's something that comes up a lot on this podcast, just like the time to review all the things AI is doing is really annoying and a big bottleneck. I love that you're working on this, because it's one thing to just make coding much more efficient and do that for people. It's another to take care of that final step of, okay, is this actually great? And that's so interesting that your sense is that's the limiting factor. It comes back to your earlier point of, even if AI did not advance anymore, we have so much more potential to unlock if we, as we learn to use it more effectively. So that is a really unique answer. I haven't heard that perspective on what is the big unlock. Human typing speed to review basically what AI is doing for us.
Mm-hmm.
So good. Okay. Alexander, we covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that we haven't covered? Is there anything you wanted to share, maybe double down on before we get to our very exciting lightning round?
I think one thing is that the Codex team is growing. And as I was just saying, we're still somewhat limited by human thinking speed and human typing speed. We're working on it. So if you're an engineer or a salesperson, or I'm hiring for product person, please hit us up. I'm not sure the best way to give contact info, but I guess you can go to our jobs page. Or do they have contact for you? Actually, do listeners have contact for you?
Before they send me like, hey, I want to apply to Codex.
No,
I do have a contact form at lennyrachitsky.com. I'm afraid of all the amazing people that are going to ping me, but there we go. We could try that. Let's see how that goes.
Or another, maybe an easier version. We can edit all that out or up to you. But or I would just say you can drop us a DM. For example, I'm Mberico on Twitter, and hit me up if you're interested in joining the team.
What a dream job for so many people. What's a sign I don't know. What's like a way to filter people a little bit so they're not flooding your inbox?
So specifically, if you want to join the Codex team, then you need to be a technical person who uses these tools. And I think I would just ask yourself the question, hey, let's say, I were to join OpenAI and work on Codex over the next 6 months, and crush it. What does the life of a software engineer look like then? And I think if you have an opinion on that, you should apply. And if you don't have an opinion on that and have to think about it first, depending on how long you have to think about it, I guess that would be the filter, right? Like, I think there's a lot of people thinking about the space. And so we're very interested in folks who sort of have already been thinking about like what the future should look like with agents. And like, we don't have to agree on where we're going, but I think we want people who like are very passionate about the topic, I guess.
It's very rare to be working on a product that has this much impact and is at such a bleeding edge of what's possible. It's what a cool role for the right person. So it's awesome that you have an opening, and this audience is a really good fit potentially for that role. So I hope we find someone. That would be incredible. With that, we've reached our very exciting lightning round. I've got 5 questions for you, Alexander. Are you ready?
I don't know what these are, but I'm excited. Let's do it.
They're the same questions ask everyone except for the last one. So probably not a surprise. I should probably make them more often a surprise. Okay, first question. What are a couple books that you recommend most to other people? 2 or 3 books that come to mind.
I have been reading a lot of science fiction recently, and I'm sure this has been recommended before, but The Culture. I think it's Ian Banks is the name of the author. Part of why I love it is because it's like basically relatively recent writing about a future with AI, but it's an optimistic future with AI. And I think, a lot of sci-fi is like fairly dystopian. But this is like people, sort of the joke, at least on the Culture subreddit, is that, let me see if I can get this right. It is a like space communist utopia, or like, I think it's a gay space communist utopia. And I just think it's like really fun to think about, like to use The Culture as a way to think about like what kind of world can we usher in, and like what decisions can we make today to help usher in that world.
Wow. I don't think anyone's recommended that. I know you mentioned before we started recording Lord of the Rings right now. If you want another AI-ish sci-fi book, have you read Fire Upon the Deep?
No, I haven't.
Okay. It's incredibly good. It's like a sci-fi space opera sort of epic tale with super intelligence.
Cool.
Yeah, somewhat, mostly not optimistic, but somewhat optimistic. Okay, next question. Is there a favorite recent movie or TV show that you've really enjoyed?
Yeah, there's an anime called Jujutsu Kaisen, which I really like. Again, it's got a kind of a slightly dark topic of like demons. But what I love about it is that the hero is really nice. And I think there's this new wave of like anime and cartoons where the protagonists are really friendly and like people who care about the world, rather than being like sort of like, if you look at like some older anime like that started the genre, like, there's like Evangelion or Akira, and like those characters, the protagonists are like deeply flawed, like quite unhappy. They didn't start the genre, but it was like a trend for a while to sort of poke fun at the idea that in these cartoons, the protagonist was very young, but being given a ridiculous amount of responsibility to like save the world. And so there was kind of a wave of like content that was like critiquing this by making the character like basically go through like serious like mental issues in the middle of the show. And I'm not saying this is better, but at least it's quite fun to have like these like really positive protagonists who are just trying to help everyone around them.
I love how much we're learning about your personality hearing these recommendations. Nice protagonists, optimistic futures.
I think, if you don't believe it, you can't will it into existence. So you need a balance.
This is your training data. Is there a product you recently discovered that you really love? Could be an app, could be some clothing, could be some kitchen gadget, tech gadget, a hat.
Yeah, so I have been like quite into combustion engines and cars. Actually, the reason I came to America initially was because I wanted to work on like US aircraft. But now I work in software. And so for the longest time, I've basically only had like quite old sports cars, old just because they were more affordable. And then recently, we got a Tesla instead. And I have to say that I find the Tesla software like quite inspiring. In particular, it has like the self-driving feature. And, I've mentioned a few times, like today, like, I think it's really interesting to think about how to build like mixed initiative software that makes you feel maximally empowered as a human, maximally in control, but yet you're getting a lot of help. And I think they did a really good job with enabling sort of the car to drive itself, but all these different ways that you can adjust what it's doing without turning off the self-driving. So like you can accelerate, it'll like listen to that. You can turn a knob to change its speed. You can steer slightly. I think it's actually a masterclass in like building an agent that still leaves the human in control.
This reminds me, Nick Turley's whole mantra was, "Are we maximally accelerated?"
Yeah.
Feels like it's completely infiltrated everything at OpenAI, which makes sense. That tracks. Two more questions. Do you have a life motto that you often think about, come back to in work or in life that's been helpful?
I don't know if I have a life motto, but maybe I can tell you about the number one company value from my startup.
Love it.
Which is still something that sticks with me, which is to be kind and candid.
That tracks. Kind and candid. Wow.
Yeah. And we
That's a
had to
great
put them
combo.
together because we, as founders, realized that we often would be nice and it wasn't actually the right thing to do. We would like delay the difficult conversations and we were not candid. And so every time we would like remind ourselves of this motto and then we would become more candid. And then 6 months later, we would realize that we were in fact not candid 6 months ago and we needed to be even more candid. So then the question is like, okay, well, like how should we be candid? Well, it's like, okay, well, let's think of being candid as an act of kindness, but also think of that both in terms of doing it and willing ourselves to do it, but also in terms of how we frame it to people.
That is a beautiful way of summarizing how to lead well. What's the book about challenge directly but care deeply? Radical Candor.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's like another way of thinking about radical candor. Okay,
Right.
last question. I was looking up your last name, just like, hey, what's the story here? So your last name is Empiricos, and I was talking to ChatGPT, and it told me the most famous individuals with the surname are the influential Greek poet and psychoanalyst Andreas Empiricos, and his relative, the wealthy shipping magnate and art collector George Empiricos. So the question is, which of these two do you most identify with? The Greek poet and psychoanalyst, or the wealthy shipping magnate and art collector?
I think it's gonna have to be the poet because he loved the island that our family's from.
Wait, you know those people? Okay, this is not news to you. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's an enormous family, but it's like
Mhm.
Greek. So, these big families,
Love
everyone,
this.
like
Okay.
everyone's your uncle. You know what I mean? Like my
Yeah.
mother's Malaysian and also like everyone is my uncle or aunt in Malaysia too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, he loved this island that the family sort of like initiated from. I believe, I don't actually know where that shipping magnate lived. I think it was New York or something. But anyway, we all came from this island called Andros, which is a really beautiful place. And it's like, there's more like livestock there than humans. Not too many tourists go there. But I think part of what I think is really cool is like he published a lot and a lot of his writing is about like the beauty of that island, which I think is super cool.
Wow, that was an amazing answer. Two more questions. Where can folks find you if they want to follow you online and, maybe reach out? And then how can listeners be useful to you?
I'm one of those people who has social media only for the purposes of having work. My phone turns black and white at like 9 p.m. at night. But yeah, so Twitter or X at Empirico. Yeah, if you post in r/codex, I'll probably see it. So you can go there. How can listeners be useful? I would say, please try Codex. Please share feedback. Let us know what to improve. We pay a ton of attention to feedback. I think it's like, honestly, like the growth has been amazing, but it's still very early times. So we still pay a lot of attention and hope to do so forever. And also, I would say if you're interested in working on the future of coding agents and then agents generally, then please apply to our job site and or message me in those social media places.
Alexander, this was awesome. I always love meeting people working on AI because it always feels like this very, I don't know, sterile, scary, mysterious thing. And then you meet the people building these tools and they're always just so awesome. And you especially, just so nice. And as you, like the examples you shared, optimism and kindness, this is what we want to be. These are the kinds of people we want to be building these tools that are going to drive the future. So I'm really thankful that you did this. I'm grateful to have met you, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.
Growth is a fairly new field. You have a lot of renowned interest in growth hacks, like what is the sure things to get growth. In the age of social media, everybody and anybody tries to share their tips and tricks. Oftentimes, things that are completely out of context, or they are very specific to one example and actually do not apply as a pattern.
So we're going to start with growth tactics that never work. If you see these items on your roadmap, you should probably not do them. What's number one?
We live in tech. There's always lots of startups. Startups are obviously looking to grow. There is a huge misconception in the field that in order to get growth going, you need a growth team. To figure out your product market fit and how to distribute it, it's not something that you can outsource to somebody.
Powerful words. I'm loving this list already.
So number two, this was my favorite, and it might be a little spicy. Never, ever once have I seen a rebrand or redesign, especially of your marketing site, produce good performance results. New CMO comes in, designing their website or designing the brand as if it was a reflection of their personal taste. And oftentimes it's promised with our acquisition is going to go up, and it never materializes into anything meaningful.
A lot of contrarian takes here. I love this.
Number three, if every single one of your initiatives that you're doing on growth is an experiment, that's a problem. It's almost like a disease, like a paralyzing disease.
Today, my guest is Elena Verna, my first ever third-time repeat guest. Elena is the smartest person that I know on B2B growth. She's also hilarious. She's led growth at companies like Miro, Amplitude, Dropbox, and SurveyMonkey. She's advised dozens of companies on growth, including Superhuman, MongoDB, Netlify, SimilarWeb, Sanity, Maze, so many more. In our conversation, Elena shares 10 growth strategies and tactics that never work, yet that she keeps seeing people and companies invest lots of resources into. She also covers her 3 favorite growth frameworks that help you wrap your head around how to think about growth. And she also does a short dive into the non-traditional career paths that we both went down. If you spend any time working on product growth, or lead people, or work with people working on growth, this episode is for you. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes, and it helps the podcast tremendously. With that, I bring you Elena Verna. This episode is brought to you by Cinch, the customer communications cloud. Here's the thing about digital customer communications. Whether you're sending marketing campaigns, verification codes, or account alerts, you need them to reach users reliably. That's where Cinch comes in. Over 150,000 businesses, including 8 of the top 10 largest tech companies globally, use Cinch's API to build messaging, email, and calling into their products. And there's something big happening in messaging that product teams need to know about: Rich Communication Services, or RCS. Think of RCS as SMS 2.0. Instead of getting text from a random number, your users will see your verified company name and logo without needing to download anything new. It's a more secure and branded experience. Plus, you get features like interactive carousels and suggested replies. And here's why this matters. US carriers are starting to adopt RCS. Cinch is already helping major brands send RCS messages around the world. And they're helping Lenny's podcast listeners get registered first, before the rush hits the US market. Learn more and get started at cinch.com/Lenny. That's SINCH.com/Lenny. This episode is brought to you by Vanta. When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things get complicated fast. Now you can assess risk, secure the trust of your customers, and automate compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more with a single platform, Vanta. Vanta's market-leading trust management platform helps you continuously monitor compliance alongside reporting and tracking risk. Plus, you can save hours by completing security questionnaires with Vanta AI. Join thousands of global companies that use Vanta to automate evidence collection, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/Lenny.
That's vanta.com/Lenny. Elena, thank you so much for being here. Welcome back to the podcast, our first ever third-time repeat guest. What an honor. Dancing if you're not watching on video. Well, thank you for being here. I was actually just looking at our first episode, which we recorded over 2 years ago, September of 2022. And someone just today left a comment. People are still finding and watching it. And this comment kind of encapsulates why I love having you on this podcast. This person said, wow, every word from Elena encapsulates years of knowledge. This is one to digest slowly, go back to, and put on repeat. Thanks for sharing your experience with the world.
Well, thank you for having me. And my North Star metric is insights per minute. That's what I try to use whenever I have any live meetings with people. So it squarely fits within what I'm optimizing for. So that's great.
That needs to be my KPI on this podcast. Insights per minute.
I think you have it. I think your insights per minute is pretty high.
That is, I do shoot for that. Although I have learned you also need it to feel good and feel there's story, there's like an interesting combo of stuff. You can't just be insight, people.
Well, yeah, it's all about how you present them too. Storytelling is a big portion of it actually to stick.
Yeah. All right. Already insight. That's an insight right there. There's two areas that I want to spend time on with you. And these are areas I know you've been thinking a lot about. One is growth tactics that never work, that people keep spending time on and waste their time on. And I know you have a nice list of things you've seen that just don't work, that people keep trying. And then two is growth frameworks, your favorite growth frameworks, to help people wrap their mind around how to think about growth and grow their product. So we're going to start with growth tactics that never works. Maybe just frame what we're going to talk about what this list and collection of tactics that we're going to talk about is.
Yeah, so growth is a fairly new field compared to marketing or product management or engineering. So there's a lot of people that are now accumulated that have 10 years or so experience, but there's also a lot of newcomers. And because there's ratio of actually newcomers is much higher than those people that have 5-10 years of experience of doing growth, you have a lot of renowned interest in growth hacks. Like, what is the sure things to get growth? What is the sure thing to get that metric up? How can I contribute to success of the company the fastest way possible? So all of these shortcuts, and obviously in the age of social media where everybody and anybody tries to share their tips and tricks and this and that, people are grasping for oftentimes things that are completely out of context, or they are very specific to one example and actually do not apply as a pattern, or simply not even applicable to their type of business whatsoever. So there's just a lot of failure happening in growth teams. It's actually, I think growth teams are becoming one of those departments that has a higher head of growth firing rate than even CMOs, because people are coming in. There's a bunch of expectations. Hey, you're head of growth, or you're a growth PM, or you're a growth marketer. You're supposed to drive growth. And when that growth does not happen, here comes the axe, and people off they go. And the recycle and cycle starts all over in order to populate those positions. So I think that there's just a lot of misinformation, I would say, probably out there in terms of what growth actually is and how it should be done in the companies. And today I just want to cover some of the biggest ones that I see as a patterns as I'm advising companies, as I'm operating in companies, because it's just so blatant, yet there's very few pieces of information on this for people to learn from.
Amazing. All right. What's number one?
Number one, I have to start with hiring. There's lots of positions open all the time. There's so many from head of growth to growth PM. There's a lot of rotation, as I said, that is happening in the field. Very few growth people actually stay in the job for over a year or 2 years. So there's a lot of constant churn and constant rehiring. And when you're doing hiring, there's a lot of mistakes that are actually happening in hiring that I just want to start off on the list. It's not a roadmap item, but oh my gosh, there's just so much fault that is happening here. And I did write about it on your blog of hiring for growth. So there's a little bit of a reference to that. And one of the biggest blatant issues that I see is hiring too soon for growth. We live in tech. There's always lots of startups. Startups are obviously looking to grow. And there is a huge misconception in the field that in order to get growth going, you need a growth team. It's absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. In order to get the growth going in the company, a founder and the founding team have to figure out how to make it grow to the first, let's say, 1 million, 5 million, 10 million in ARR. Some of the companies don't even create growth teams until they're 100, 200 million in ARR. Because to figure out your product market fit and how to distribute it, it's not something that you can outsource to somebody. It's not somebody that with a shiny resume can come over and all of a sudden wave a magic wand and all of a sudden you have viral campaigns and a bunch of signups coming through and everybody is paying and everybody's retaining. That just doesn't happen. So I see that mistake happening a lot. I really believe that the founder-led growth is not being popularized enough, that you do not need growth teams until you actually can start running experiments on your user base, which means that you have volume of users that you can learn from and optimize and innovate on. And that first wave of growth has to be founder-led. And there's two specific reasons that I anchor on, which is before you have growth team, before you even think about growth team, first you need to have solid PMF, product market fit, means that you have a solution to a problem and you have customers not only coming in and solving that problem with your solution, but they're also retaining and staying with you. So there is a good retention. You can use Chanel score of how many people would say that they cannot live without your product as well. But there's some sort of PMF. And then number two, you have data. Growth cannot function without data. So if you have 10 users or 10 customers, that's not data. That's a G sheet with your customers. And you don't need a growth team for that until you have data that you can actually do an analysis and you can create hypotheses on and you can start applying experimentation. Don't even think about growth team.
So just to summarize a few of the things you just said, just for folks, you basically have seen startups look for a head of growth to join and solve their growth problem. And your insight there is just almost always that is not going to be the solution to your problem until you have strong retention already, have a really high score on the Chanel score if you don't have a ton of data yet. And part of your advice is just the founder should continue to do this for as long as possible. 1 million ARR is like one milestone a lot of people recommend. To your point, a lot of companies wait a lot longer.
Yes. And honestly, the longer you wait, the better it is, because that way your entire company will be trained to be responsible for growth, as opposed to putting this one island with a growth team and saying they're going to be growing and what is the rest of the company is doing. So honestly, the longer you wait, the better.
As you talk about this, sales is a part of what you describe here, like hiring your first salesperson. And so I guess, how do you think about like your first head of growth versus salesperson? Is there anything advice there? Is like for B2B SaaS, you probably don't hire head of growth for even longer, right? You hire sales first, or what's your advice?
It depends on how you're actually going to collect the monies. If your money collection is going to happen through sales team primarily, then you absolutely should be hiring sales way before growth. In fact, in the sales-led companies, growth teams are not necessarily needed even that much. You might have a growth marketing team, which is really a demand gen team that is rebranded for growth marketing, so they can charge you 20 to 30% more in their salaries. But at the end of the day, sales is doing your monetization. They are doing your activation. They are doing your retention and success efforts. So for sales-led companies, hire sales, absolutely. Unless you're starting to do self-serve revenue. So you're trying to have product sell itself through potentially freemium acquisition, trial acquisition, or you actually having product-led activation, monetization. That's when you would need a growth person. So if you're starting with self-serve monetization, growth hire should be probably first before sales. Your sales are going to be more opportunistic in nature versus if you're a sales-led company, go ahead, hire sales. Wait for growth until you're ready to overlay product-led growth on top of your sales motion.
Okay, that's an excellent clarification. So basically what I'm hearing, the advice is hire a head of growth only when you have clear product market fit and you're a product-led company, and beyond 1 million ARR, ideally, something like that.
Right. And I won't say you're a product-led company. You are relying on product-led motion to resolve a lot of the growth levers within you, because you don't have to be fully product-led company. But so if product, let's say, acquires people let's say with the SEO or CM, and then its product is meant to activate them, and then sales closes them. Sales would be obviously important as well, but growth would have to be coming a little bit sooner as well. So if you have any product-led components where product is responsible for acquisition, activation, monetization, or retention, that's where growth comes in.
Okay, that we talked deeply about that specific topic in our first conversation.
Yes.
So I just want to go deeper there.
I
There's a
needed
lot
to
there.
bring it back. This is like
Yeah,
it keeps
I love that.
happening. I need to repeat it. Well, you need to repeat it 3 times, right, before it sticks to people. So hopefully this is the 3rd time.
Absolutely. I'm only saying that because people may be wanting more of what you're describing, and I will point them to our first episode, which goes deep on that one topic.
Amazing.
Excellent. Anything else before we move on to number 2?
No, let's move on to number 2.
Let's do it.
Okay, so number 2, this is on the other side, on the matured company, where I see a trend over and over, and it's becoming even more prominent right now, of when companies' growth slows down, which inevitably happens for a lot of businesses. It happens for a variety of reasons. We're not going to go into the reasons as to why growth can be slowing down, and then they hire a shiny growth head to fix the problem. So basically saying, hey, our business is slowing down. We're on the decline. We're going to bring this person, or we're going to put this team together, and our growth is going to accelerate. That just does not happen. If you have the overall business slowing down, your head of growth is destined to fail, because the reason business is slowing down is much deeper than not having a growth team. Growth team can optimize. Growth can maybe lift it by 10, 15%. Maybe that's enough for you. Even that is on the upper end of what growth team would be able to do if there is a slowdown trajectory. But what's important is that if you have core product and core marketing issues, growth team will not be able to fix them for you. You're going to have to address the big elephant in the room as to why business is slowing down in the first place, as opposed to just plopping a growth team on the issue and expecting them to do miracles while the rest of the business continues chugging on the same trajectory that caused the slowdown in the first place.
Wow, that is I've never heard this point before, and it's such an important one. And it's very related to your first point. Growth isn't going to build a product people want. They will help you grow it.
Exactly.
And if your business is slowing, your product market fit basically might be disappearing, and growth isn't solving that problem.
Disappearing, it may be degrading, it may be being eaten by a competitor because there's somebody that is stomping on your territory. The point is, growth can amplify great product market fit, and growth can help you grow faster once you're already growing. But if you're slowing down and you have issues with either your go-to-market strategy or your core product strategy, with your core product market fit, growth is going to be absolutely helpless to do anything. And it's a huge waste of money, because at those size of the companies, you would need fairly large growth teams in order to tackle every single product flow and interface that is already out there and invented. So it's a huge expense. ROI on it, maybe at least 1-to-1. Like what you put into it, you might get that much out of it, but it's not going to be enough to create a J curve of the reacceleration by just relying on growth team. So I think it's just like, this is where the name growth team is like plays against it, because like, oh, we're looking for growth. Do you have a growth team? No, that's actually where I don't have a better idea, by the way, how to name it. But this is where I think it's misunderstood that there is the silver bullet of a perfect head of growth, perfect growth team that can reverse the trajectory of the business.
So then for folks that are thinking about, oh, wow, maybe I shouldn't be hiring a head of growth. When should you hire a head of growth when you're kind of an established company?
If you're declining in your revenue growth or whatever other metric that you're looking at, your weekly active users or whatnot, see at least that you're able to plateau it so you can stop the decline. So there is already a visible trajectory that your core product and your core marketing teams are able to at least reverse the degradation of the metrics. Ideally, you would even start to see some immediate signs of life, that there is potential in the business, in the pockets, and then you can put growth into it to really blow it up to the full extent. But if you're on a decline, just don't do it, because there's going to be very disappointing results in a year or so.
Awesome. Okay, great one. Let's move on. Number 3.
Okay. Number 3. So this was my my favorite, and it might be a little spicy because if there's any marketers listening out here, but doing rebrand, and more specifically homepage redesign to drive growth. Oh, this one hurts me so much. And I've lived through so many of these. And never, ever once have I seen a rebrand or redesign, especially of your marketing site, produce good performance results. Now, there's many reasons as to why you might want to do a rebrand, why you might want to redesign your marketing site, because you're trying to enter a new market, new category, your product has evolved and you need to do a full updates. But those are almost like it's a lagging indicator that something needs to change and you're changing it. And then you know that you're going to have to optimize the hell out of it in order to actually bring it even to the previous performance results. So it's like a stepping stone back, but there is a much bigger room for upside that you can get to, but you're going to have to work to get to that upside. But yet so many companies, there's a story that happens all the time. I hire a new CMO comes in. They're like, okay, what's inside my house here? My house is not designed to my liking. Let me repaint these walls. I want this shade of blue. Let me put the couches over here. And they start almost like designing their website or designing the brand as if it was reflection of their personal taste. And oftentimes it's promised with our acquisition is going to go up, our category penetration is going to go up, our education or like awareness is going to go up. And it never materializes into anything meaningful because, again, if you're doing it as a step towards unlocking new global maxima, sure, I love that. Do it. Go after it. Know that you have a ton of work ahead of you in order to actually unlock that global maxima. But to ever promise a homepage redesign or marketing site redesign in order to drive more acquisition is a failed promise that is going to be led by lots of agency money spending, often $1 million plus, lots of arguing about which shade of blue your brand color is going to be, and 8 to 10 months at the minimum of development, and very lackluster results afterwards.
Oh man, I'm loving this list already. This is great. To your point, it may still be worth doing if you're coming into it eyes wide open. This isn't going to drive growth,
Absolutely.
but we're setting ourselves up for a future brand that's world class, and we know our current brand stinks and our homepage needs to be refreshed. If you're aware it's not going to drive growth, it might be okay.
I mean, every single time I've seen a marketing site at least rebrand, it's been a step back in performance that then is being treated as a fire drill to fix. Don't do it. If you expect like immediate results out of it, or at least educate the team on how long it's going to take to get to the point where you think that there's going to be upside from your away from your original brand.
So I've experienced this not just with marketing sites, but like most redesigns. Redesign of the product redesign of onboarding. Yeah.
How much product and engineering work goes into like just changing a logo in your product or changing colors? It's insane with no results ever. There's no results.
And to your point, it's like, okay, well, we've spent 6 months redoing onboarding. Everything we've built builds on this new design and experience. So we can't not launch it because every team is working on this new world. So we're just going to launch it and then we're going to claw back. We're going to figure out how to get it back. Right. That's how it goes.
It's a new starting point, and that starting point is going to be much lower than your current optimized experience that you have. Whether it's well optimized or not optimized, it doesn't matter. It's gone through some level of optimization. Versus rebrand is always a shot in the dark. It might be prettier, sure, but that doesn't mean it's going to perform well. So obviously, never say never. Sometimes it might work. And if it worked for you, I am so glad, but that's an outlier, and don't treat it as a pattern.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, I think everyone listening to this that is working on something like this is probably thinking, no, I think we have a good shot at this. We've really thought deeply about this, and it might actually be really positive. And in your experience, it sounds like you've seen it work like occasionally, or is it just never?
The best I've ever seen is that it produced net neutral results. and it produced us better ability to optimize towards something bigger. That's the best case scenario. So if you're working on it, my biggest advice is not to say you stop. Just understand that the goal here is not to drive at launch in the 7-day readout after launch some increased performance. The goal here should be we will launch, we will probably see a hit, model out and forecast for a hit, and then give yourself 2 to 3 months at the minimum, ideally more like 6 months, to really optimize it back to a good standing where it can potentially outperform. But you need to bake in that 3 to 6 months of work after the launch, which is what a lot of companies and teams forget to do because they just move on because it's like big initiative, big pop, and off we go to our next project.
I love that we're only at number 3. This is amazing. Let's do number 4.
Okay. Number 4 is obsessing over your competition. Okay, so there's a little bit of a gotcha here. I tear down companies all the time. I have thousands of Gmail accounts that I sign up for any and every product. I go through their entire experience. I look at their monetization strategies. I look at their activation. I do it across direct competition of the company that I'm working with as well. I want to know what I'm playing against. So knowing what your competition is doing is extremely important. Being inspired by some aspects of what your competition is doing in their experience is a wonderful place to originate an ideation or potentially try to implement into your product as well. But blatantly saying, hey, we're going to copy all of these best tactics or all of these flows because, hey, they're doing better than us. Let's just rip them and do exactly the same. Why is an our onboarding looks the same as this onboarding? This company is so successful. That's where things really go wrong because every single experience is very unique to their customer, to their channel. You don't even know if you're getting their actual experience or you use some tester cell or you're getting some personalized thing based on where you signed up from or who you said that you are. So you don't even know what actually the overall thing looks like most of the time. And putting that into your product just leads to very subpar results. And there's a lot of drive, especially to have it as a shortcut. Okay, we don't want to go through this ideation or user research. We don't want to do user interviews, but we don't want to do A/B testing. It works for them. It must work for us. Let's just go and do it. And it fails 95% of the time. Now, there are certain pieces that I would really recommend. I already said inspiration. I use it for inspiration all the time. I'm like, okay, what's cool? What is everybody doing? So because I want to just stay in the know on what other people are implementing. And hopefully if it's in the control experience, it works and it worked better. I use web archives a ton for logged out pages too. I'm like, okay, how did it look last year? Why does their homepage look this way, or the pricing page? And I analyze that and I try to extrapolate some results. I also think that there's a lot of patterns you start to notice as you start tearing down all of these companies. You're like, oh, these elements are always the same. That means all of these companies are arriving to these things and they seem to be winning elements, and you can take those elements and put them into your product, but you can never skip the ideation, the design, the user research, the customer interview, the experimentation step. And you should always balance it with actually innovating yourself in your product, because copying competition is the fastest way to mediocrity, because you'll never be a leader if you copied somebody else. Leader is by default is somebody that is able to separate themselves from the pack in something else. And if you are trying to just be, I don't know who is ever trying to be the mediocre middle of the pack, but maybe it's a good starting point, but never the end goal. The only other thing that I'll say before I'll stop talking is benchmarks. Benchmarks are also very dangerous here to use because benchmarks are usually done on all of the competition and all of the softwares out there. And the way people define numbers is so different from company to company. Even if you look at something as simple as signups. Okay, how many signups should you be on average getting, or like your conversion from prospecting visitor to a sign up, or from a sign up to activated user. It so depends on how do you define prospect visitor. Some companies define it as all traffic. Some define it as new traffic. Some of them define it on the new IP address, new persistent ID, how Google Analytics defines it, how Amplitude defines it. So like all of these definitions are so different. So taking also any benchmark that is derived from competition and saying this is where we should be is also so dangerous, because it might not even be applicable depending on how you defined the metric. And one of the things that all of those benchmarking data fails is like to actually look at specific definitions. And that's not to say that benchmarks are not extremely valuable data point in your decision making, because it's an input that you should leverage to say what it could be possible, but to just blindly take it and set it is just a sure way to fail any of your initiatives and efforts.
You're telling me that there's no shortcuts.
I wish there were. I mean, I've been doing this for over 15 years. If there were any shortcuts, I'd be all over them. There are patterns and there are frameworks, but there's no shortcuts.
So people hearing this, they're like, okay, don't copy the competition, use it for inspiration. It's a little hard to know exactly the line between those two. Is there an example that you can think of where you took really interesting inspiration from someone and it worked for a company you're working with? Or you copied someone and it just like, oh, that failed. That was a bad idea.
I use competition to understand the general framework of how people collect some information or resolve certain steps. So, for example, sharing model. So many products like, hey, can you share this with somebody? Well, you can go and spend so much time of like figuring out how it should look, or you can go to Slack, you can go to Figma, you can go to Miro, you can go to Notion, and like, okay, Google, like how are they doing sharing model? You can look at all of that and say, okay, here's all of the common elements that all of them have. Here's the pieces that I think will apply to my product. Here's the things that do not. And here's what I can derive from it. I use it as an input into ideation, but I never use it as a destination for the result. If that makes sense, because it's very helpful to not start from scratch. The empty start problem is real. And competition is a wonderful way to not have that and to have an input into it, but never to just say, oh, we can skip the design cycle, off we go, or just like slap our collars on it. If it works for them, it's going to work for us. So I have extensive Miro boards with everybody's onboarding flows, with everybody's pricing pages, their sharing modal, their invite colleagues modals that I reference all the time, but there have never been the like exact thing that I would use for any company, as opposed to say, hey, I think this is a great starting point for you. Here are the things that I think will work very well for your company and for your product. And take these elements. The rest you need to go and do themselves. So at least that way there's a starting point. And this is why I also started doing a lot more of like my own almost prototypes, like skeletons of here's the elements that you should do in these flows. Like I have one for pricing page, I have one for homepage, but you need to put in your own oomph into it in order for it to actually work.
What made me realize this back in the day was thinking at Airbnb, especially thinking about people looking at our flow and being like, they've got it all figured out. We're just going to copy what they've done because they're so thoughtful and have tested everything. And knowing how that has not happened and how so much of this was guesswork and we hate so much of it, just thinking about people trying to copy this, thinking we know what we're doing. It's like, what are you guys even thinking?
Oh my God, I actually had that happen to me at Dropbox not so long ago. Somebody reached out and they're like, oh, like, it was like some page and activation flow. And they're like, oh, I love this page. This is so cool. I love what you've done here. And like, I'm going to go take it to my company. And like, we haven't touched it in 10 years. Like this page is like only visible for like small cohort of people. Like, please don't do it. Like, please don't copy it. Like it performs like shit. I know it's out there, but it's not meant to be out there. Nobody like thoughtfully put it out there. So like, that's definitely a huge failure point that you can run into.
Right. If it's like a fancy company, you assume they're just so smart and diligent about every little pixel and decision.
Oh, if people only knew of how much craziness is happening in those big companies and how much chaos there is.
Oh man, that's a whole other podcast episode.
Whole other podcast, yes.
Okay, number 5.
Okay, I have this one. It's a little bit meta, but I see it happening all the time. We love to think that our problems are unique. Like, I'm working in this company and like we have this growth problem and we need to go and figure out the solution from the grounds up. Maybe this is like a little bit related to the competition point, but I'm very sorry to break it to all of you, but your problem is not unique. I am 99% sure of that. Your problem has been felt by somebody somewhere in probably many, many places. And you trying to re-engineer solution is time lost to market and has a huge opportunity cost. So I think my biggest thing that I try to get people is like, don't think that you have unique problems. You don't. I know we love to, like, it would be fun to have something unique to learn. But with so many startups, with so many people in our industry, in your industry, whichever industry that is, your problem has been solved by somebody, or at least that there's a lot of failures on the problem that you should be learning from. And number one thing, that whenever you have an initiative or whenever you have a metric that you need to go and move, do not start from scratch. Ever. Do not start from scratch. It's like the worst thing that you can do, because you're going to waste so many cycles on trying to do something that probably has already been solved. So, which means like, how do you approach this as a result? Well, you can look at competition and how they're solving the problem. That's one input for sure. You should go find people that have solved this problem, because there are people there and people love to talk about what they do. So take advantage of that human psychology and go find those people and just ask them, how did you do it? What did you do? What happened? Obviously, not all the time everybody's going to respond, but we have LinkedIn, we have X. Go out there, find the people that you think, or ask around in your network of who you think might have similar solutions, and just go talk to people. It would be an incredible shortcut. Like, if you're talking about an actual hack, that is a hack to get to an optimal solution. And then the last thing that I would also say is that solving any one problem uniquely is extremely inefficient. We are evolving so fast in our market. You need to be able to patternize your solutions. Patternize, is that a word?
Let's make
patterns. Make patterns out of your solutions. So more you can stop looking at it as a unique data point or unique problem, and more as I need to fit it into existing pattern, or I need to figure out the framework on how to solve not only this problem, but other problems. The faster you'll be able to get at least to like 60% of the solution there. And then you can do very authentic implementation of whatever you want to do. But to go from 0 to 60 manually as a one-off, we do not have time in the industry right now to do it unless you want to be left behind.
Bam. Powerful words. Is there an example that comes to mind of you doing this either the wrong way, just like thinking this was unique and realizing I should have talked to people, or where you actually realized something was not unique?
I'll give you actually an example that I had when I was at Miro. At Miro, we were first trying to stand up community. And I was tasked to do it, and I've never done it before. So I'm like, I was banging my head around against the wall, and I'm like, okay, how do I do it? Like what software do we use? Where do we acquire users? Like, what kind of content is going to go in there? So I was like approaching it almost like a finding like product market fit. And then like, I will fail so much doing it. And I honestly only have a year to get to some sort of traction before this is going to get shut down, because company is impatient, company is moving fast. So if this is going to be a failure point, it's either going to be taken away from me, which is fair, or we're just going to close the door on it, which would be a huge failure, both on my point and for company as a whole. So I went and I started talking to a bunch of people that have done communities. And I remember talking to Carolou from Atlassian, who has stood up community. I actually hired her as an advisor afterwards. And she's like, well, are you talking about a user community or an agency community or a partner community? And I'm like, my mind was blown. I'm like, I wasn't even considering all of these angles because I was just literally thinking about users only. And she's like, well, you shouldn't necessarily start with a user community. If you want some results out of it, go to agency or partner communities first. And she would outline it to me in a structural way for me to grasp my head around it and then implement something that had much better results at the end that I wouldn't even gotten to probably until 6-8 months later if I didn't talk to her. So I think it has to come with a place of knowing that you don't know everything and humility to say, hey, I need help. And I might have a already fancy title. At that point, I was an interim CMO at Miro. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And it actually earns you a lot more credit than you think. And a lot of people are afraid to admit that they don't know how to solve a problem. And that's why they start from scratch. But you need to really put your ego aside and get some help faster than trying to hit every single failure point along the way.
And the thing that'll really hurt your ego is failing. And so the more you could do to avoid failing and being successful with this initiative by talking to people, doing research.
And to be fair, failure is going to be unavoidable. If you talk about growth is about failure. My big motto, life motto in growth is that you have to fail to learn. You can't just constantly succeed. Success is an output of a lot of failures. But the question is how much time do you have to fail? And a lot of times we don't realize how many failure cycles we're going to have to go through before we get a success. And that company or even market has no time for that. And so still expect to fail, for sure. But the timeline for failures is going to be shortened quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've gone halfway through your list. There's 10 items on this list, right?
Yes. There's 10
cool.
items. Next one is a good one.
I'm excited to chat with Christina Gilbert, the founder of One Schema, one of our longtime podcast sponsors. Hi, Christina.
Yes, thank you for having me on, Lenny.
What is the latest with One Schema? I know you now work with some of my favorite companies like Ramp, Vanta, Scale, and Watershed. I heard that you just launched a new product to help product teams import CSVs from especially tricky systems like ERPs.
Yes, so we just launched One Schema file feeds, which allows you to build an integration with any system in 15 minutes as long as you can export a CSV to an SFTP folder. We see our customers all the time getting stuck with hacks and workarounds, and the product teams that we work with don't have to turn down prospects because their systems are too hard to integrate with. We allow our customers to offer thousands of integrations without involving their engineering team at all.
I can tell you that if my team had to build integrations like this, how nice would it be to be able to take this off my roadmap and instead use something like One Schema, and not just to build it, but also to maintain it forever.
Absolutely, Lenny. We've heard so many horror stories of multi-day outages from even just a handful of bad records. We are laser focused on integration reliability to help teams end all of those distractions that come up with integrations. We have a built-in validation layer that stops any bad data from entering your system, and One Schema will notify your team immediately of any data that looks incorrect.
I know that importing incorrect data can cause all kinds of pain for your customers and quickly lose their trust. Christina, thank you for joining us. And if you want to learn more, head on over to oneschema.co. That's oneschema.co. Let me summarize the first 5 real quick, and then we'll keep going. So the first is wait longer than you think to hire a head of growth. Wait until you have product market fit, maybe $1 million ARR, especially if you're self-serve oriented. Number 2 is if your growth is declining, the head of growth won't solve that problem. First, stop the decline at least. Third is redesigning your homepage, marketing page. Rebranding is not only not going to help you grow, it's going to probably hurt growth and slow things down. And so just go into that eyes wide open. 4 is don't just copy the competition and assume they know what they're doing and assume that what they do is going to work for you. Use it as inspiration. On the other hand, get inspiration from experts, competition, trends, things like that to help you solve your problem, which you think is no one solved before. It turns out every problem you're solving, someone has solved in some way, most likely.
Yes, especially in growth. I mean, I know this can apply to a lot of product management and to marketing as well, but in growth, when you're talking about how do I lift activation or I have a really big drop off between activation and monetization, these things are a lot more patternized than you would expect them to be. So go and find those patterns as opposed to trying to re-engineer it.
Awesome. Okay, let's keep going. Number 6.
All right. So next one is a little spicy one too. And that is as part of growth, you owning some channels. A lot of growth teams own acquisition. So owning channels and growth prioritizing SEO, SEM, social is one of the biggest mistakes I think a growth team can do. Now, obviously, I'm not saying don't do SEO or don't do SEM, so organic search or paid search. I'm not saying that. However, as a growth team, your number one priority is to create your owned or your earned channel. So channel that you've earned and that nobody else can compete in but you. What do I mean by that? When you're doing organic search or paid search, you're making Google richer. Great for Google. Google is an incredible company, but by dumping money into paid marketing, you are paying them and you're paying for their distribution and access to their distribution. If you're doing social too, like you're doing, let's say, Instagram or whatnot, paid advertising in Instagram, that's great. But all of that works on algorithm. An algorithm can give it, but algorithm can also take it away at any point. And you have no control because you don't own those channels. You are playing with other players and you're competing against them in somebody else's channel. Now, on the other side, there can be your own earned channel. What is an earned channel? It really goes into the concept of product-led growth acquisition, which means you're relying on virality, on word of mouth, on user-generated content in order to attract new acquisition through top of the funnel. So why is that earned? And why do I put that above, let's say, organic search, which is SEO obviously is wonderful. But again, search just goes to Google. That's great. Versus if you build your own user-generated content and your own community, nobody else can compete with you in that. That is yours. Your competitors cannot buy their eyeballs. Their people are going to be attracting other people. Referrals from people to people are everything. So Lenny, if let's say I sign up for, say, Superhuman and I invite you into it, that is much stronger acquisition tactic versus you looking for and finding Superhuman, let's say, on paid marketing advertisements. And especially with our age right now where search as an interface is changing towards AI interface, and the AI interface is giving a lot less credit to all of the content. Content is almost becoming a database. And there's a new UI that is being developed on it. Before it was Google was the UI. And now AI is coming in with a new UI. And there's not as much control that you have over this new UI that is being developed. Focusing on these earned channels that you own becomes the utmost priority. And if you don't have them on your growth roadmap, you're going to be in some really big trouble over the next year to 2 years because your cost of acquisition is only going to go up. Your competition in those channels is only going to go up. You're constantly going to be praying to algorithm gods to giveth your way, but they can take it at any point. And it's really one of those fundamental growth team failure points if they don't spend enough time on virality and user-generated content to create their own earned acquisition.
Wow. Okay. This is incredible. This is its own podcast episode in theory that we could do of how to actually do this. We're not going to cover the strategy. Also, this may not necessarily work for every company. Your point is you can grow other ways, but this is by far the most powerful, most effective, cheapest, most likely to succeed if you can figure this out.
It's not cheapest. It's actually costs a lot of product and engineering and even marketing resources to stand up. So it's not the cost of a budget, but it's cost of people that will have to work to create your own channel, so to speak, for acquisition. And you're right. Maybe that's not for everybody, but it's actually applicable to more products than people realize. Because every single product has some sort of team functionality, some sort of roles that they need to do. Every product can drive word of mouth loop. Actually, that's not true. Not every product can drive word of mouth loop, but they can drive recommendations and they can create user generated content. One of those tactics usually applies to at least one product. So there is an opportunity to create some sort of earned channel, even though it might feel unnatural at the beginning, depending on how you reach PMF and how you've scaled in the first couple of stages of it. But if you're not exploring it, and if you're not investing into it, or at least trying and failing within it, I think that you are really leaving too much of your growth future into the hands of somebody else that you have no control over.
So the advice here is your growth team, it's okay if they work on SEM, paid growth, basically, and SEO, but most of your effort and investment should be in earned channels, owned channels, specifically virality, user-generated content.
Just diversify your strategy so not all of it is reliant on somebody else giving you access to their distribution. Now, for example, at Dropbox, over 50% of acquisition comes through sharing. So I load something into my Dropbox. Maybe I need to send it out for signature. Maybe I need to just share this file to transfer it to somebody. Maybe I just need to share this file as a final delivery to my clients that I was working with. Well, that recipient then is now aware of Dropbox, so it solved the brand awareness. By that action of sharing, you actually almost activated that recipient too. So you don't need to educate them anymore on how the product works and whatnot. And the percentage of those recipients sign up to become Dropbox users, and that accounts for 50% of acquisition. That is a stable, earned channel that nobody can compete with. And it's only for Dropbox to lose, so to speak. And we actually had our own growth pod focused on it because to optimize both sender experience and the recipient experience, because it was such a powerful growth loop and growth engine that driven the company. And every business should have an attempt at one of these.
I think this is going to be a really good push for a lot of growth teams to think about what can we do here. Okay, number 7. 4 to go.
Number 7. We've talked about this at least a little bit in our last podcast too, but I see this as a question that comes up all the time and something that people are afraid of to invest, which is a mistake. Every single company starts with their growth efforts focused either on product-led growth. Hey, I'm going to have everything being done self-serve, or on sales. In marketing, I'm going to have sales team, and then I'm going to have marketing team, and they're going to do all of the work, and my product is just going to create the functionality. And that's good and fine for a while, depending on how long that while is, but not overlaying every single way that you can grow through product, through marketing, and through sales as an evolution is a huge mistake that a lot of growth teams fail to iterate on and innovate on. The way that I'd best be comparing it is if product has a product market fit, which is great, that product market fit is not going to last that product forever. They're always going to have a second horizon. They're always going to have a product market fit expansion efforts in order to continue to grab as many people and solve as many people's problems as possible and increasing their TAM. Well, the same comes with growth. If you have a growth model that works for you, that's wonderful. Good for you. Optimize it, grow it, scale it, create a team that will be nurturing it and that will be amplifying it. But you're going to need to evolve it. And that evolution needs to come through overlaying other growth models on top of it. So A, you are diversified away from just one growth model failing, because a lot of times you're going to get into a situation of law. I love Andrew Chan's article here. It's called A Law of Shitty Click-Throughs, where if you over-optimize the same thing over and over again, it has minimal returns. And some growth models have very limited time span. Some of them are huge. Some can grow for, like sharing loop at Dropbox. It's 17 years in the making and it's still firing. Good for it. Like, that's amazing. But that's very much an anomaly. Most of growth loops spin out of their ability to produce meaningful results for you within the first 5 to 6 to 7 years. So continuously overlaying those different growth models. And what I'm specifically talking about is product-led growth, marketing-led growth, sales-led growth, and introducing it into this ecosystem constantly is what really separates companies that can continue growing for a long periods of times versus the ones that can see a really big blip, potentially even unicorn type of growth rates have 70, 80, 100, whatever plus percent, and then it starts to slow down. And don't wait till that slowdown happens. You need to really start thinking about different ways that you can attract people to grow, so you are not leaving a gap in the market that somebody else can enter and own, as opposed to you playing in every way in where you can interact with your customer.
The way I think about this is like the S curves of every growth model and growth lever, right? Eventually it'll help and then slow down, and so you want to find the next S curve on things that'll grow your business.
Yes, absolutely. The way that I see it often is that, especially when growth teams, they hit a really big result out of some initiative, they just like keep trying to focus on it over and over again. And sometimes that focus is warranted. Like I said, our sharing loop at Dropbox has its own growth team against it. Great. But at the same time, that's not warranted for all of the growth, or you need to realize that there's no more juice to squeeze out of this thing. And then you need to go and you need to move on, which actually brings me to my, like a little bit of a next thing too, is you need to do it every 18 months. Because a lot of them are going to fail. And every 5 years or so, you for sure need a new channel, new growth loops, new tactics, new engines, so to speak, to power your growth engine. Whether it's overlaying sales on top of self-serve, whether you're doing a lot of, let's say, virality right now in terms of acquisition, and you're going into marketing a lot heavier. But every 5 years, something big has to start taking a big portion of your volume. And for that, every 18 years, you need to introduce something.
18 months.
New. Sorry. Yeah. 18, for every 18 months, you need to introduce something new in order for it to continue evolving.
And was that number 8 of the list we're going through, or that's like a bonus piece of advice?
No, that's just a bonus piece of advice.
Okay, cool. Okay, got it. And so the advice here essentially is you'll find something that is helping you grow. Assume that will slow down at some point. Start thinking about other levers and growth models to layer on top of that.
Yeah.
Something I've seen, let me know if you agree, is usually there's going to be like one lever that is most of your growth for a long, long time. And so all other things are not going to be as big, but they are still important.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is I try to focus 20 to 25% of growth teams' time annually, not every given sprint or not every given quarter, but annually, to introduce a new growth loop, or to introduce a new channel, or to introduce something new that can potentially bring us additional oomph to our growth engine. I know that a lot of it is going to fail. None of it is gold on any growth metrics, because you cannot goal it immediately, let's say on monetization or immediately on acquisition. You're just going to cut it at its knees immediately if you're not going to let it evolve into something that can be monetized, that can be responsible for acquisition. So like example on Mirrorverse, which is a user-generated content library of all of the mirror boards that people create. It took us probably 18 months until we started putting metrics, expectations on it. Before that, it was a thing that we were testing. And it was being used by a lot of people, but we're like, we don't even know exactly quite how this is going to fit all together. And then it started taking off as both engagement engine as well as acquisition engine. But it's important to constantly give your team room to try those new ideas. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself that your growth loops and your growth engine is slowing down and you don't have time to find that second horizon. And that is the worst situation to be in. That's where growth starts to slow down, and to recover out of that is impossible because you need revenue. You need revenue, you need revenue, you need revenue. And these growth loops on average take 6 months, a year and a half to start producing even visible revenue. So that's why you need to start layering it very soon into your initiatives.
To make this even more concrete for people that are starting to like, oh shit, I got to do this. Can you just give us a list that doesn't have to be exhaustive of potential growth loops, levers, methods, engines for folks to consider? You've mentioned a few, but just give a list of people like, okay, got it. Maybe we'll try one of these. I'm
really big on creating a growth loop out of user-generated content. I think with everything that is happening with AI and SEO at the moment, your biggest claim to fame on content strategy will be harnessing user-generated content, whether it's user-generated templates, whether it's user-generated case studies, review, whatever it is. You need to start investing into it now, creating a library out of it, using it for activation purposes, using it then for acquisition purposes, using community to spark the conversations around it. Like that can be a really wonderful strategy that everybody should consider of whether there's juice in it within your product. Other ones can be, hey, we're a very, let's say, individualistic product, but can we actually create a referral mechanism for it? For B2C, that's actually very straightforward. A lot of B2C products thrive on referrals. For B2B, it can be more of invitation of other team members into the product to complete other jobs to be done. Hey, I've done this. I need my manager to see it. Can I create a report to share with my manager? And all of a sudden it starts to spread within the company. So creating additional almost product functionality that then creates these loops potentially for you. So it can be a slew of things. Obviously, I'd highly recommend just understanding all of the menus of these earned tactics. I should do a blog post on that actually. And then just see what works for you or not, because at least ideation step of it has to happen. If you, especially you're relying on search engines for your acquisition, start thinking about some of the earned channels as soon as possible.
And even though you recommend spend more time on earned channels, own channels, there's also explore SEO, explore paid growth, right? Sales.
Absolutely. I mean, almost everybody does paid, arguably almost too soon, potentially. There's a point to make that shouldn't be. A lot of companies should not be doing paid right now, but SEO, social, resellers, all of those are wonderful tactics. Obviously, I skew very heavily towards earned channels just because once you stand that up, that's a gift that just keeps on giving, and nobody can take that away from you. But that doesn't mean that other tactics and other channels should not be explored as well.
Amazing. Let's keep going. So we have 3 to go. Number 8.
So number 8, this one's kind of a doozy, and I think a lot of people don't do it. I don't know why they don't do it. I think it's such a incredible ability to propel forward. And that is what doesn't work, as I said in the previous growth tactics, is trying to think that each problem is unique and you need to solve it on your own. Maybe this is not so much doesn't work, but not hiring advisors is something that I do not recommend for you to do. You can get access to anybody for 1 hour a week. Yeah, you'll have to pay them. So nobody's going to volunteer their hour. We're all very, very busy. But hiring advisors is the biggest career amplification and your business amplification can possibly do. Because to create a network of people that have all of these data points and all of the other patterns that you can do is something that can just propel you so far forward. That doesn't mean you have to do everything advisor says. That's not the point. They're not the strategy setter, but they are additional input into your decision-making that you otherwise wouldn't have. You can go and hire somebody from Atlassian. You can go and hire somebody from Airbnb that have been and lived through all of this, and they can help you solving your problem. So I think any growth team that does not have an advisor is a growth team that is underperforming, because even me, who I've advised so many companies, I've operated at so many companies, I don't know everything. Every time I take an operator role, I hire advisors for myself because that is the fastest way to learn anything. And I often see these teams that just try to figure out everything on their own and not have any advisory, advisors on their boards, so to speak. And I'm not even talking an official board. I'm talking about not even advisory board, but you can hire somebody as a contractor that will be your advisor. I think is a huge mistake, especially in this day and age, because we have a big asymmetry of information in our field. There's very little available to learn because we're all very cagey because competition. But at the end of the day, people know a lot of the stuff and how it worked for them internally. And I highly, highly encourage you to not try to wing it on your own.
Along those lines, there's also an advice of just like, don't worry about advisors. You never know if they're going to be useful. There's all these hanger-ons that join your startup and want to help, but they're not helpful. If you give one tip for a founder or team that's interviewing advisors, looking for an advisor to vet them, to help them find people that are actually great, what would your tip be?
I have actually a good one. Many advisors might not like it though. I think that you should not hire an advisor until you do some sort of workshop with them on the problem that you're experiencing. See them in action. See what kind of information they can provide to you. Because any advisor that is cagey about what they know is not the type of advisor that you're going to want to have on your team. You want to have somebody that has lived through it, that can talk to you to your face about it, that is able to have hard conversations, that is able to provide you necessary examples, that is able to give you and connect dots for you for necessary patterns. So instead of just saying, oh, this person looks good, let me hire them as an advisor, say, hey, let's have a workshop first. I have this problem. I think that you can help me fix it. Pay them for it, whatever their rate is for that workshop for sure. But see how they actually interact with your team and then hire them on ongoing retainer basis. Because that creates an interview loop that is very practical, that is very quick to understand whether you can work with them, they can work with you, and whether they have anything to contribute to you. And then every single month, evaluate whether that advisor should stay with you. Some advisors, they only need to be with the company for 3 months and off they go. That's fine. Some of them might stick with you for 4 or 5 years, but every single month you should go and say, did they add any value? And I'm not saying that advisors should have any monetary expectations, like revenue attribution, so to speak, to them. But did you find value in having conversations with them? Did they offer anything valuable to you?
That is an awesome tip. And I could see why people would be like, God damn, Lena, don't say that. Makes so much sense. Okay.
All right.
To go. Number 9. Here we go.
My last one is also that I see something way too often nowadays on growth teams specifically. This is very, very growth problem. And that is too much risk averseness on growth, where you're starting to test everything. If every single one of your initiatives that you're doing on growth is an experiment, that's a problem. And that is something that you should take a look at and say, what am I doing? And why do I need a precise scientific measurement for every single thing that I touch in order for it to go to production or like to hit the market? It's almost like a disease, like a paralyzing disease that slows down progress, that slows down velocity, that slows down learnings, that creates very much terrible consequences to the output that growth teams produce. And it's a little bit counterintuitive because experimentation is a way to do growth for growth teams, and it's their process. Like, growth teams are meant to experiment. But I also think that experimenting on everything is something that is quite terrible once the team starts to get locked into that state, and it's really hard to get out of because they're then afraid to do any change until or unless that they test.
So where do you find that balance? I imagine people hearing this are like, oh yes, this makes sense to me. And then they continue to test basically everything. What's kind of some heuristics you'd recommend for knowing, okay, just don't test that. Don't worry about it. You don't need credit for that win.
First of all, I think that people should trust their intuition a little bit more. Data is good, but data is only good if you have enough of it. So if you have low volume real estate that is going to take you 8 months to reach some sort of answer, do you really want to test it for 8 months? Like, what's the point of it? It's my rule of thumb. If we cannot collect the sample size in a month, we shouldn't test it, period. Because it's just then it's not fast enough. We should just go and do pre versus post. Pre versus post is pretty powerful It's also a way to assess your impact, and you can still roll back if it doesn't work, but don't think that everything needs a scientific explanation to whether it needs to be moved forward or not. Also, experimentation cannot be the way that people make decisions in the company. There's still so much about knowing your user, understanding the market, for your brain to connect all of those dots and to know what needs to be an experience that your customers are going to want. That, yeah, if scientific data, like a very tight determination of the probability that this is a success is important, absolutely do it, because it might be a really big strategical pivot that you're planning to do. So it's a data point to validate that all of this extra work will be needed. It might be a very high trafficked real estate that even like 0.1% difference will mean millions of dollars for you. But other than that, it should be just go, go, go. Do pre versus post, by the way. I'm not saying just like release and move on. Release, do 7-day, 24-hour readout, 7-day readout, 28-day readout, even come back to it a year later and measure some of the retention or expansion data that is associated with it. But to test everything is debilitating to growth teams, and it paralyzes them in its place. So kind of look at your initiatives and say, where do I need precision? And it's important, and I can get it fast enough, versus where we should just go for it. And yeah, we will fail there too. And that's okay. And we can roll back and we can figure out how to make it better. But failure is going to happen regardless. And statistics is tricky. Like too many people take it for face value, versus it's just like a directional data point to say there's likely a new distribution that has maybe a different mean, and 5% of the chances, if you're measuring 95% statistical significance, you might not even be there. And yet we like take it for so granted. Oh, it's going to drive this much lift. So I just think that people stop, like in this age of data, don't almost rely enough on their own intuition.
A lot of contrarian takes here. I love this. Elena, we've reached number 10.
Okay.
And I know number 10 is like a special one where it's more than one quick fire.
Yeah, so number 10 is going to be my little fire round.
Okay.
My fire round on like little things that I just see people spending way too much time on, and like it hurts my heart because it's not going to drive any results on them. Okay. So number 1, color optimizations. For the love of God, a blue is a blue is a blue. As long as it's accessible and as long as it's bright enough, off you go. You do not need to test the shades of blue or test it against green or so on. Pick a color, move on. Please don't spend time on it. That's a early 2000s tactic. It doesn't work anymore. We're past that in technology sector. Number 2, third-party signups. A lot of times we think, oh, we're going to get so much more acquisition if we add Google Auth, or if we add Facebook Auth, or Slack Auth, or Microsoft Auth. Add whichever auth you want to add to it. In some cases, it's very important to have third-party auth. So for example, if you're a developer product, please have a GitHub auth. Like it's kind of unnecessary. The developers already have the account there, have them connect with it as opposed to create a new one. However, if you're a productivity product, email is fine for the longest time. Gmail is nice. It's not going to drive more acquisition for you. You're just going to do a mix shift into more people using it. It's not going to create incrementality. It's not going to improve your activation. It's not going to improve your retention. It's not a growth tactic. It's part of your just customer experience that you want to invest into. Number 3 on the fire round, one email wonders. We stress too much about this one email that we're going to send to this one customer group. And we're like, oh my gosh, how much lift is it going to cost? It will never cause any lift. It will never work as a one-off email. Too few people open it. On average, 25% open rate. At best, you'll get 40 to 50% open rate. Too few people click it. One email will never do anything. If you're going to go into email, please think about it as a series, about communication, about how it interacts with product communication. It's a whole strategy. It's a whole thing. Please don't stress about one-off email. Never test a change in one email. It'll never work. You're going to have to do the whole goddamn thing and see how it's going to do, not just one email. Just never going to work.
I'm definitely guilty of this one. That is a really good one for sure. And it's so obvious in hindsight. So I love that you share that.
Yes. And then the last one, growth teams are often too obsessed about removing friction. Because if we remove the steps, then more people are going to get to the destination. And To an extent, if you have horrible friction in your product where it's just like confusing about what the next step is, I agree. Go fix the friction of the cognitive load that it takes to complete a step. That is the friction that you should be working on. However, just removing steps or yanking or simplifying things to an oblivion where you lose an identity of what you even do or what you're capable of doing is a completely failed growth tactic. So simplifying may be an initiative of a different problem that you're solving, but if you ever have a line item on your roadmap that says simplified onboarding, please cross it out. It's not going to work because simplifying onboarding is an action. What is the problem that you're solving? You're never trying to solve a problem of simplifying. You always have a problem of people are confused in it, or people don't know where to go, or they get lost in it, or they're not educated enough. That is the problem. And simplifying might be a solution, but it can never be a problem on its own. And too many growth teams are just obsessed with this notion that came out, I think in early 2000s, like, oh, simplifying is like the biggest growth hack that you can do. Please don't do it. It's only a solution to a very specific problem set of too much complexity.
Wow, that was a big one to end on that I think will help a lot of people avoid wasting time. Again, a whole other podcast conversation could probably focus just on onboarding advice that you probably have, that I know you have. We've reached the last item. Is there anything else you want to share about this list before we move on?
I think we spent too much time on the list. We're ready
Not
to
too
go.
much, just enough time. And kind of on that note, I want to call an audible. And so we were going to talk through all of your favorite frameworks. I like the way this conversation has gone. I don't want people to get overwhelmed with information. So one idea is just list maybe your favorite growth frameworks, just for folks to go check these out and not spend too much time on each one.
Yep, let's do that.
Okay.
Great. So the list of my favorite growth frameworks, and to me, a framework, by the way, it's not a solution. It's a pattern. It's a pattern that exists across almost every single company out there. And it's a starting point for your ideation and to figure out how you can almost shortcut to possible list of solutions as opposed to trying to figure out too hard of how to even define a problem on its own. So number one, it's probably expected if anybody has read anything or listened to me talk, is growth loops. I think anybody who thinks about growth and anybody who thinks about growth in the funnel fashion versus understanding what the growth loops are, is missing out on the ability to create sustainable growth engine. So it's very important to think about action, reaction that generates another action, and it's a self-contained flywheel that can spin. A lot of resources on it at Reforge. Brian Balfour and Casey Winters and Andrew Chen wrote a lot about this. Highly recommend anybody looking into. My next favorite growth framework is actually written by you, Lenny, and Dan, which is a race car framework. Everybody has a really hard time often thinking about what are all of the parts of growth initiatives and which are long-term, what are short-term, how much are they going to actually produce in results. And race car framework is wonderful because it separates different initiatives into, hey, there's some engines, loops, that are just going to keep on spinning. There's some fuel that you're going to need to add into it, potentially like paid marketing dollars. There's some turbo boosts that you may have in your race car that are going to be let's say big user conferences that you're going to hold as a product, or there's lubrications and optimizations that you're going to need to do of pouring oil into that engine so it actually performs correctly. It's beautiful. I talk about it all the time with everybody. The next favorite growth framework for me comes from Bengali, and that's adjacent user theory. I think that one's very powerful in terms of thinking about growth evolution. And as we talked about, adding different growth models to your growth ecosystem, different growth loops, but also adjacent users, which are outside of your ideal customer profile or ICP, outside of your core user, and how growth team can really bring them in and add additional oomph to your product without even expansion of product market fit by just optimizing their experiences. I'm going to stop at these three because I think those are the most powerful ones.
Cool. On that last one, Bengali was on the podcast. We'll link to that episode if you want to go deeper on the adjacent user theory. I love how that was a few minutes on things that could change people's life if they adopt one of these frameworks and learn
Yes.
how to think about growth in this way. It's like such a powerful mental model for thinking about all the stuff you've been talking about this entire conversation.
Yes, those frameworks are like my church in my mind, of like how my system of beliefs, of how I think about growth and how I think about it on a strategic level of owning it as a strategy, not just like a tactic or an initiative.
The Church of Elena Verna. Amazing. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to bring us over to Contrarian Corner, recurring segment on this podcast, where I like to ask the guest if there's something they believe that most other people don't believe. Contrarian opinion, you might say. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I do have a very contrarian opinion, although it's not so much related to growth as opposed to maybe your personal growth. And my contrarian opinion is that full-time jobs are not the best way to monetize the skill that you have. It's one of the packages that everybody should evaluate and take advantage of. But too many people blindly default to that package and don't explore other options that are both available on the market as well as best suited for their personalities, for their interest, and for their skill set. It's like a default plan that everybody subscribes to that is faulty in itself.
Wow. Okay. Wait, we got to hear more. So what are some other packages? I think we're like buying some of these packages, these other options. But I guess what should people be thinking about when you say this in terms of what can they actually do and explore?
I'll premise it to saying I don't want to rain parade on full-time roles. They're wonderful on your ability to learn, to get the expertise, and depending on which career stage you are at, full-time roles might be the absolute necessity for you to move on to and unlock the next level. However, full-time roles box us into one company that may not be a great fit for us culturally, for our skills, for our ambitions, for our interests. Life is too short for that, and ability to really go and figure out your own best monetization model. Just like you work on that for your business, you should work for that on yourself without an assumption that full-time is the only option that you should have. So what are the other options? There's so many. Obviously, the couple known ones, freelancing. You can be a contractor. I do a lot of advising and consulting because for my brain of how I work and how I like to puzzle solve and pattern match, it works much better to be horizontal across many companies versus vertical on one specific one. But that doesn't mean I still don't take those vertical engagements to deepen my knowledge into any specific topic. But overall, it's a lot more interesting for me to pattern match across multiple companies and help them grow as opposed to just focusing on one. There's interim engagements where there's a predetermined end date to your agreement. There's fractional engagements where you're working part-time on something as opposed to engulfing yourself completely full-time. There's other ways to create courses. There's a way to create newsletters and monetize them like you're doing, Lenny. Such a fantastic job. So there's just so many options, and people are sometimes paralyzed by fear of instability that it creates when you start to explore other options because you don't have that contract with that one company that provides you that paycheck every 2 weeks to rely on. But at the same time, you can create diversification for your career and you can create stability. It just depends on when you need to pull that trigger and when is the right time for you to explore. But to spend your entire career only assuming full-time is the only way, I think is a complete mistake that a lot of people are doing.
One of my favorite posts of yours is along these lines, which is around increasing, what you want to do is increase optionality.
Yes.
And I guess talk about that because I think it's a really powerful piece of advice.
So this advice of career optionality being the ultimate North Star for anybody in their professional journey is something that I'm very strong on because a lot of people have the goal of, I don't know, maybe I want to be a VP or I want to become a CEO or I don't know, I want to be a manager and I want to like people manage. And this becomes their North Star and they start working towards it. But a lot of people, when they get to their perceived corporate ladder North Stars, find themselves extremely dissatisfied, depressed even, by how terrible that job is. Could people manage your job? I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, because it's a terrible job if you don't enjoy it, and you don't know if you're going to like it until you actually do it. So I think setting a title as your goal, which so many of us have titles as goals, is very wrong way to think about it, as opposed to saying, hey, my goal professionally is actually to have options. So I can choose what I want to do. So I can choose what fits my life right now, that I can choose what fits my skills and that fits my personality, and that makes me happy. And to get career optionality, if that's your goal, you start thinking about your progression a lot differently. You're not starting to think about it of what will get me to the next title. You start thinking about can I do next year that will increase my option pool. And that's very different than just getting to a higher title. And if you start thinking about evaluating opportunities, or like whether you should stay at the company, whether you should move at the company from the lens of, does it increase my options if I stay at this company for one more year? Or does it keep it the same? Or does it actually potentially decrease? That is the right way to find your ultimate happy place and happy job that brings you energy, that brings you happiness, versus just going for a title and then being very disappointed with what that brings along with it.
Amazing advice. So important. And something I'll add that I think is a balance to what people may be feeling here is like, oh, I'll just bounce around all the best logo companies and create this killer resume. I think you also need to build depth and actual experience that you can tap into if you do any of these things. For example, a lot of people want to jump to like, I'm going to be a newsletter person, I'm going to start a podcast, be an advisor, before they've done anything real. And you have nothing to actually base your advice on.
You have to earn your right to unlock optionality. And earning that right does usually lie within full-time jobs. That is a universal truth. But then at some point, you should start not just looking at full-time jobs as the only option that you have. You should start to think about when can you start unlocking new ones and testing the market on it.
The other point is that you've been a great example of is it's not a one-way door. You can have a full-time job, go to something else, go back to a full-time job, be an advisor, be an interim person, be a newsletter person. You do that really well. You should do it all. It's all a menu of options, and you pick a menu item that fits you best in any given point of your life. It's never say never and never shut the door on anything. Absolutely. Oh my God. Elena, this was incredible. Before we get to our very exciting lightning round, is there anything else you want to share or leave listeners with? Maybe a last nugget or thought, or not? Because we've covered a lot already.
No, I think we've covered so much. Okay. I don't want to overwhelm.
Let's do it. With that, we've reached our very exciting lightning round. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
First question, surprise, surprise. What are 2 or 3 books you've recommended most to other people?
Okay, so I just finished this book that I loved so much. It's not a professional book, but it's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. It's the same author that wrote Martian. Martian also was made in a movie. So good. I couldn't put it down. I think I read it in like 2 days straight. So highly recommend that. And the next one that I also started reading right now is Bobbyverse. Bobbyverse is so good. It's actually takes into account of like AI and how we can upload our consciousness in the AI and what can happen with that. So highly recommend it. I think it's actually closer to what potentially can be in the truth for us in the future than not. But I'm a big sci-fi geek, so I read mostly sci-fi books.
I have a sci-fi recommendation for you that comes from Noah Smith. I love his newsletter. It's called Noah Opinion. And he has a list of his favorite sci-fi books that I've been working my way through. It's called, you may have read it, by Werner Vogel, Fire Upon the Deep. Have you heard of this?
No, I have not.
It's described as not a sci-fi, but like a space opera, where it's epic, the most epic scale of universe story.
I'll download it tonight. It'll be on my list.
It takes a little bit to get into. It's like quite unique, but you just keep going, and it's incredible. And AI plays a big role in it, actually.
That's awesome.
Okay,
I'll download it.
There you go. Okay, question number 2: favorite recent movie or TV show you really enjoyed?
Yes, I just got to watching Beef on Netflix. And it's so good. It's set on. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody.
Okay.
Just Beef. You should watch it. It's a limited series. It's so good. It will run through. I love Veep on HBO. So funny. I've probably watched it 2 times already, the entire series, and I'll probably watch it more because it just cracks me up every time. I think this is actually how our government works. So I'm very intrigued by that. And then the last one that I really liked that is coming up with the season 2 now, so you should catch up on season 1, is Last One of Us. If you don't like zombie movies or zombie shows, don't watch it. But if zombie and apocalypse is your cup of tea, Last One of Us, so good.
Or is it Last of Us or Last One of Us? Last of Us.
Is it Last of Us?
I'm Googling while we talk. Last of
Okay.
Us. I think it's Last of Us. Yeah, The Last of Us.
Last of Us. Okay, Last of
and
Us.
You're saying there's
Yes.
a 3rd season coming soon. That's exciting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's so good.
Okay. I love it as well. Great pick. Okay. Your favorite product you recently discovered that you really like?
I recently discovered that they make heated shoes, and it changed my life. My feet are always cold, and there's boots that actually have heated wires through them, and I'm obsessed.
And are you like charging it? It's like USB plug-in kind of thing?
Yeah, I just come in, I plug them in, and then I go outside, and I'm warm, and I think it's magical. I have a jacket, also heated jacket. Now I have shoes. I just need my gloves, and I'll be all set.
I love the USB-powered clothing. And we should note you live not in Silicon Valley. You live on the East Coast, sort of.
Central. The coldest it gets is like 30s here, but I'm always cold. So this is just like my love language is something heated that I can sit on. I'm that cat that sits like underneath the light all the time. And then I also just got AirPod Max, my headphones. I couldn't connect them to my computer. Still technical difficulties on that, but I love them. The sound is amazing. That's like my new favorite gadget that I'm obsessed about.
What a cool combination. Heated shoes and AirPods.
Yeah.
2 more questions. Do you have a favorite life motto that you often come back to that you find useful in work or in life?
Yeah, it's really one: progress over perfection. I think that you just need to the velocity of information is far more important than something that I think is perfect. And perfection is outcome that you get to, but progress over perfection all day, any day.
Very appropriate for a head of growth person.
Yes.
Final question. You're not only one of the smartest people I've met on growth, you're also one of the funniest people on social media, especially on LinkedIn. If people aren't following you, they should. They will not only learn, they'll also be highly entertained. Is there a favorite meme that you created that you are very proud of, that you can describe that we might want to link to?
Yeah, so I also want to say a lot of people hate me for doing so much memes as well because they think it's not serious. And I want to rebuttal that really quickly because I think humor is the best way to disarm people and to point out very painful situations that we're facing with every single day or conundrums without putting anybody on defense, because we can all laugh at the absurdity of the lives that we live in every single day. And pictures worth 1,000 words. And sometimes memes are just the best way to communicate the most complex situations that we are facing within our corporate world. And they help us understand how common all of those situations are. We're not unique. You're not feeling alone by feeling down about what happened. Everybody's going through the same thing. So that's why I love memes, because they help connect people on both sides, even if you're making fun of one side, because they're like, yeah, that is true. And this is so funny. So I'm a big proponent of that just because I think it's actually a better way to both unite people and just talk about hard problems that otherwise would be not read if you put it in words. But my favorite meme is actually one of the first ones that I've created. And I think it's from Family Guy, where they have an elephant and a penguin standing. And then there's Moses, I think, or some biblical character saying, "What the hell is this?" looking at the elephant and the penguin. And the result of it is a child that has a penguin body and an elephant head. And if you think about elephant as product and penguin as marketing, what the hell is this? Is growth, which is a byproduct, a weird byproduct of product and marketing merged together that doesn't really fit with either, yet it's its own entity. I don't know. I think that one's the best to describe to people what growth is.
So appropriate. Also well described. It's hard to describe a meme and make it feel funny. So good job. Thank you for doing that. We'll link to this meme in our show notes. Elena, this was incredible. Thank you again. Thank you for being our first ever third return guest. Hopefully there will be many more episodes of Elena Verna. 2 final questions. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out and learn more? And how can listeners be useful to you?
Find me on LinkedIn or my Substack. Not competing with you, Lenny, but I share a lot of my thoughts and everything that I learned on my own Substack. It's just elenaverna.com. LinkedIn is for all of my memes. So go there if you want to laugh. But if you want to learn from what I'm learning, go to my Substack. And how you can be useful, tell me what problems you're facing. Now, don't tell me, oh, our growth is slowing down. What should I do? I can't help you with that. Too broad. But if you're having a situation, there's often really good ping for me to go and write about it or to do more research about it. So I just love to hear what's on people's minds so I can both help them connect their dots as well as learn about it myself.
And what's the best way for them to do that? Is it like DM you on LinkedIn? Any other
DM me on LinkedIn or just reply to my Substack newsletter email. It goes directly into my personal inbox. So I read every single one of them.
That's a really good tip. People don't know that. When you get an email on Substack, if you reply, just go straight to the author.
Exactly.
Elena, thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Thank you for having me, Lenny.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.